Standing in the banker's office, dirt still under his fingernails from a morning spent trying to save dying cattle, Ethan heard the words that would shatter everything. "Marry her, or I foreclose tomorrow." The woman in question sat rigid in the corner. Lydia Chen, the school teacher everyone whispered about, the one no decent man would touch. She didn't look at him. He didn't look at her. But in 48 hours, they'd be husband and wife, two strangers trapped in a prison neither one chose. Stay with me until the end. Like and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The thing about desperation is that it doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It creeps in quiet, settles in your bones like winter cold, and by the time you notice it's there, you're already making decisions you swore you'd never make. Ethan Hale had sworn a lot of things in his 34 years. Most of them were lies now. He stood in front of the mirror in the boarding house room he'd rented for the night, trying to knot a tie with hands that had forgotten how. The last time he'd worn this shirt, Sarah had been alive to fix his collar. The last time he'd stood in front of a preacher, he'd actually wanted to be there. The tie hung crooked. He left it that way. Outside, Silver Creek was waking up the way it always did, slow and mean, like a drunk coming off a 3-day bender. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A wagon rattled past. Normal sounds for a normal Saturday morning, except there was nothing normal about what was about to happen. "You don't have to do this." Ethan turned. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Marcus had been Sarah's brother, which made him the closest thing to family Ethan had left besides Emma. And Marcus, unlike most people in this town, would tell him the truth even when it hurt. "Yeah, I do." "There's other ways." "Name one." Ethan's voice came out harder than he meant it to. "I got 48 hours before Garrett forecloses. I got a daughter who needs a roof over her head and 3 squares a day. I got 90 head of cattle that'll be someone else's property come Monday morning if I don't—" He stopped, jaw working. "So yeah, Marcus, I have to do this." Marcus stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "You know what people are saying about her. I know what people say about everyone in this town. Most of it's horseshit. This might not be." Ethan finished buttoning his vest, his movements sharp and angry. "She show up drunk to teach school? She steal from the church collection? She run off with someone's husband?" He met Marcus's eyes in the mirror. Or is her crime just being Chinese and smart enough to make the local gossips feel small? Marcus flinched, but he didn't back down. "Her crime is being alone, Ethan. No family, no connections, nothing but that sharp tongue and those books she hides behind. You marry her, you're taking on whatever she's running from. And mark my words, a woman alone like that is running from something. We're all running from something." The silence that followed was heavy enough to break furniture. Marcus sighed, turning his hat in his hands. Sarah wouldn't want this. It was the wrong thing to say, and they both knew it the second the words left his mouth. Ethan turned slowly, and his voice, when he spoke, was quiet. Dangerous quiet. "Don't you dare tell me what Sarah would want. Sarah's dead. She's been dead 2 years, and I'm still here trying to keep our daughter fed and our ranch from falling into Garrett's pocket. So unless you got $10,000 you forgot to mention, I suggest you keep Sarah's name out of your mouth." Marcus took a step back, his face going pale. "Ethan, get out. I didn't mean... I said get out." After Marcus left, Ethan stood alone in the room that smelled like old tobacco and someone else's cheap cologne, and he let himself feel it for exactly 30 seconds. The anger, the grief, the bone-deep exhaustion of being a man with no good choices left. Then he locked it back down, put on his coat, and went to go marry a stranger. The church was nearly empty. That should have bothered him more than it did. But Ethan had stopped caring what Silver Creek thought about him around the same time they'd stopped bringing casseroles and started bringing judgment. Reverend Phillips stood at the altar, looking like someone had asked him to officiate a funeral. Mrs. Henderson, the Reverend's wife, sat in the front pew with her spine so straight it could cut glass. And in the back, trying to be invisible, sat 3 of Lydia's students, young girls who probably thought they were being brave just by showing up. Emma wasn't there. His daughter had made that clear this morning, her 11-year-old face set in lines too hard for her age. "I won't watch you replace Mama." She'd locked herself in her room at Marcus's house, and no amount of reasoning or threatening had changed her mind. So yeah, nearly empty. The door opened and Lydia Chen walked in. Ethan had seen her around town, of course. Silver Creek wasn't big enough to avoid anyone, and the school teacher with the Beijing accent and the Eastern manners had been a topic of conversation since she'd arrived 3 years ago. But he'd never really looked at her before, never had a reason to. She wore a dress the color of charcoal, high-necked and plain, with her black hair pulled back so tight it must have hurt. No flowers, no veil, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was. Her face was composed, unreadable, like she'd carved it out of marble that morning and decided it would do. She walked down the aisle alone. No father to give her away, no friends to stand beside her. Just her and that steel rod spine moving toward the altar like she was walking to her own execution and refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. When she reached him, she met his eyes for the first time. Hers were dark, direct, and completely empty of anything resembling hope. "Mr. Hale? Miss Chen. Shall we begin?" Reverend Phillips cleared his throat, looking between them like he was hoping someone would call this off. When no one did, he opened his Bible with hands that shook just slightly. "Dearly beloved." The words washed over Ethan like rain on rock. There, but not penetrating. He said his vows when prompted, his voice flat. Lydia said hers the same way, each word clipped and precise, like she was reciting multiplication tables. There was no warmth, no tears, no moment where their eyes met and something passed between them. This wasn't a wedding, it was a business transaction, a merger of two desperate people who'd run out of options at the exact same time. When Reverend Phillips said, "You may kiss the bride," Ethan saw something flash in Lydia's eyes. Not fear exactly, but a kind of bracing, like she was preparing for a blow. He leaned in, pressed his lips to hers for exactly 1 second, and pulled back. It was the minimum requirement, nothing more. "I now pronounce you man and wife." Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes, though whether from emotion or disgust, Ethan couldn't tell. The three girls in the back clapped hesitantly, and just like that, it was done. Ethan Hale had a new wife. Lydia Chen had a new name, and neither of them had a damn clue what came next. The ride to the ranch was silent. Lydia sat beside him on the wagon seat, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She hadn't brought much, 2 trunks of clothes and books, a small case of what looked like teaching supplies. Everything she owned in the world fit in the back of a wagon. Ethan understood that feeling better than he wanted to. The road out of Silver Creek was rutted and rough, spring rains having torn it to pieces that no one bothered to fix. The wagon jolted and swayed, and more than once Lydia had to grab the seat to keep from being thrown sideways. She didn't complain, didn't say a word. After an hour, Ethan broke the silence. "It's another 2 hours to the ranch. If you need to stop, I don't." Her voice was cool, controlled, the kind of control that came from practice, from necessity. Another mile passed. Then another. The landscape opened up, rolling hills giving way to scrubland dotted with sage and juniper. Cattle grazed in the distance, moving slow across land that had been Hale property for 20 years, land that had almost stopped being Hale property 3 days ago. "About what Marcus said," Ethan started, then stopped. He didn't know how to finish that sentence. Lydia turned to look at him for the first time since they'd left town. "Your brother-in-law doesn't trust me. I don't blame him. I wouldn't trust me either if I were in his position." "That's not—" "Mr. Hale," her voice was sharp enough to cut, "let's not pretend this marriage is anything other than what it is. You needed a wife to satisfy Mr. Garrett's conditions. I needed a solution to my own circumstances. We have both achieved our objectives. There's no need for dishonesty between us now." Ethan felt something hot flare in his chest. Anger, maybe. Or just exhaustion with the whole situation. "Fine. You want honesty? Here it is. I got a daughter who hates you before she's even met you. I got a ranch that's barely holding together. I got debt that'll take years to pay off, and that's if we get lucky with the cattle prices. I got no idea how this is supposed to work, and I sure as hell didn't plan on doing it with someone who looks at me like I'm the warden and she's serving time." Lydia's expression didn't change. "I see. And what would you prefer? Should I pretend to be grateful? Should I smile and play the blushing bride?" Something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "I'm here, Mr. Hale. I will fulfill my obligations, But I won't lie to you or myself about what this is. We're strangers who signed a contract. Nothing more. Then we understand each other. Perfectly. The silence that followed was colder than the one before. Ethan focused on the road, hands tight on the reins, and told himself this was fine. This was what he'd expected, what he'd signed up for. It still felt like swallowing glass. The Hale Ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun started its descent toward the mountains. 200 acres of scrubland and pasture, a main house that had seen better days, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, and a handful of outbuildings that needed more work than Ethan had time to give them. It wasn't much. It was everything. Lydia studied it all with the same unreadable expression she'd worn since the church. If she was disappointed, she didn't show it. If she was relieved, she hid that too. Ethan pulled the wagon up to the house, setting the brake with more force than necessary. "I'll get your trunks. I can help." I said, "I'll get them." He climbed down, his boots hitting the dirt with a thud that felt final. This was it. This was home now for both of them, whether they liked it or not. The front door banged open, and Emma stood there. She'd grown in the 2 days since he'd last seen her, or maybe it just felt that way. 11 years old and already looking at him like he'd betrayed her in the worst way possible. Her blonde hair, Sarah's hair, was tangled, her dress wrinkled. She'd been crying. He could see the tracks on her face even from here. "Emma, Uncle Marcus brought me back." Her voice was small and hard at the same time. "Said I had to be here. Said it was my home." "It is your home." Emma's eyes slid past him to Lydia, who was climbing down from the wagon with careful, precise movements. The look on his daughter's face made Ethan's chest hurt. "She's not my mother." "No one's asking her to be." "Then why is she here?" Ethan moved toward the porch, but Emma stepped back, keeping the distance between them. "We talked about this, Emma. The bank was going to take the ranch. I didn't have a choice." "You had a choice." Emma's voice cracked. "You chose her over Mama." "That's not... Emma, your mother is gone. She's not coming back, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But this ranch is all we have left. If I'd lost it... I don't care about the ranch." The words came out in a shout that echoed across the yard. "I care about you. I care about us. But you just..." She was crying now, the kind of crying that came from somewhere deep and broken. "You replaced her. Like she didn't even matter." "Emma." But she was already gone, running back into the house and slamming her bedroom door hard enough to rattle the windows. Ethan stood there, frozen, his daughter's words hanging in the air like smoke. Behind him, he heard Lydia's quiet footsteps on the dirt. "I should leave." He turned. "What?" Lydia's face was still composed, but something had shifted in her eyes, something that might have been pain if she'd let it reach the surface. "This was a mistake. Your daughter's right. I don't belong here." "You can't leave. The contract be damned." There was heat in her voice now, the first real emotion he'd heard from her. "I won't be the reason a child suffers. I won't be..." She stopped, looked away. "I've been that child. I know what it feels like." Ethan felt something shift in his chest. For the first time, he saw past the armor she wore, saw the person underneath. Someone who'd been hurt. Someone who understood. "1 month," he said. "What?" "Give it 1 month. Emma's angry, but she'll adjust. She has to. And you..." He gestured at the wagon, at the trunks that held everything she owned. "Where would you even go? Garrett made sure everyone in town knows about this marriage. You think you can just go back to teaching school like nothing happened?" Lydia's jaw tightened. "I'll find something. In Silver Creek? Chinese woman with no family and a failed marriage?" He hated how cruel the words sounded, but they were true. "You'd be lucky to find work scrubbing floors. Better than living where I'm not wanted. That makes 2 of us." The words came out before he could stop them. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to stand in that church and promise my life to someone I don't know, don't trust, don't even like?" He saw her flinch and felt a savage satisfaction that lasted exactly 1 second before the guilt hit. "But here we are. We made our choices. We signed the papers, so we deal with it." "Ill." Lydia stared at him, and for a moment he thought she might slap him, or leave anyway, or both. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and nodded once. 1 month. After that, we revisit this arrangement. Fine. And Mr. Hale? I don't like you either. She walked past him toward the house, her steps measured and controlled like she was marching into battle. Ethan watched her go, then turned back to the wagon and started unloading her trunks with movements that were just shy of violent. Welcome home, he thought bitterly. This is going to be a disaster. The house still smelled like Sarah. Lydia noticed it the moment she stepped inside, lavender and something else, something sweet and domestic. It was everywhere. In the curtains, in the furniture, in the very walls. A ghost made of scent and memory. The interior was not what she'd expected. Clean, but cluttered. A main room with a fireplace, a kitchen that opened off to the side, 2 doors that presumably led to bedrooms, furniture that was solid but worn, pictures on the mantel, a blonde woman with a kind smile, holding a baby. The same woman, older, standing next to Ethan, both of them laughing. Sarah. Of course. Lydia forced herself to look away from the photographs and focus on the practical. Her trunks would need to go. Where, exactly? She hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't let herself think about the reality of living in this house, in this woman's space, trying to exist alongside her memory. The bedroom door opened and Emma emerged. The girl had stopped crying, but her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy. She looked at Lydia with something that might have been hate, or might have been fear, or might have been both. My room is off limits. I understand. My mother's things are off limits. Of course. And you're not my mother. You'll never be my mother. You're just someone my father had to marry to keep the ranch. Each word was designed to hurt, and they succeeded. But Lydia had learned long ago how to take pain and turn it into something else. How to let it slide off without leaving marks that showed. You're correct on all counts, she said evenly. I have no intention of replacing your mother. I have no intention of interfering with your relationship with your father. I'm here because circumstances required it, nothing more. Emma blinked, clearly not expecting that response. So you're just going to… what? Stay out of my way? If that's what you prefer? Yes. It is. Then we have an understanding. They stared at each other across the room, a child grieving her mother, a woman trying to survive, both of them trapped in a situation neither wanted. Lydia felt a strange kinship with this angry little girl, which was probably the saddest thing she'd thought all day. The door opened and Ethan came in carrying her trunks. He looked between them, his expression wary. Everything all right? Fine, Emma said shortly. Then, to Lydia. Are you sleeping in my father's room? The question hung in the air like a blade. Lydia saw Ethan's jaw tighten, saw the muscle jump in his cheek. No, he said before Lydia could answer. She'll take the spare room, the one off the kitchen. Emma looked between them, something like relief crossing her face. Good. Then she turned and went back to her room, closing the door with deliberate care. Ethan set the trunks down. The spare room's small, used to be storage. I cleared it out this morning, but it's not… It's fine. There's a bed at least, dresser. Window looks out toward the barn. Mr. Hale, Lydia kept her voice level. I'm not here for comfort. A room with a door that closes is more than sufficient. He nodded, started to leave, then stopped. About what I said earlier. Outside, that was… true? She met his eyes. You don't owe me apologies for honesty. I prefer it, actually. It's simpler. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or just exhaustion. Dinner's at 6. Emma usually helps with cooking, but tonight, I can manage. You cook? I've kept myself alive for 28 years. I think I can handle preparing a meal. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Kitchen's through there. Larders stocked, mostly. Chickens out back if you need eggs. Salt pork in the cellar. Thank you. After he left, Lydia stood alone in the main room of her new home, and it was her home now, legally at least, and let herself feel it. The weight of it. The strangeness of it. The absolute wrongness of being in a dead woman's house, wearing a wedding ring she didn't want, tied to a man who looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. She'd made mistakes before. She'd survived them. She'd survive this too. But first, she needed to unpack. Isn't that? Dinner was a silent affair. Lydia had found enough ingredients to make something resembling a meal: fried salt pork, beans, biscuits that were passable if not impressive. She set the table with the plates she found in the cupboard, each one chipped and worn from years of use. Emma ate without looking at her. Ethan ate without tasting anything, his mind clearly elsewhere. Lydia ate because she needed to, mechanically chewing and swallowing food that might as well have been sawdust. "It's edible," Ethan said finally, and Lydia couldn't tell if he meant it as a compliment or an observation. "I'm glad it meets your standards," Emma snorted, which might have been a laugh or might have been derision. Hard to tell. The silence stretched on. Lydia found herself studying them, this man and his daughter, these strangers she was now legally bound to. Emma had her mother's coloring, that much was obvious from the photographs, but her expressions were all Ethan. The way her jaw set when she was angry, the way her eyes went distant when she was thinking about something painful. And Ethan was harder to read. He had walls built so high and thick that she doubted he even knew what was behind them anymore. Grief had done that to him, probably. Grief and responsibility and the slow grinding weight of keeping a ranch alive when everything was trying to kill it. She understood walls. She'd built plenty herself. "I'll handle the dishes," Lydia said when they finished. "That's not," Ethan started. "I'm capable of washing dishes, Mr. Hale. I won't burn the house down in the process." Emma pushed back from the table. "I'm going to bed." "It's barely 7. I don't care, I'm tired." The girl disappeared into her room without another word. Ethan sighed, rubbing his face with both hands. "She'll adjust." "Will she?" "She has to." He stood, started gathering plates. "I'll help." "That's not necessary. It's my kitchen, my dishes, my—" He stopped. "I'll help." They worked in silence, Lydia washing while Ethan dried. The routine was domestic, almost intimate in its ordinariness, and she hated it. Hated how normal it felt when nothing about this situation was normal. "Your room," Ethan said suddenly. "If you need anything, blankets, lamp oil, whatever, just let me know. I'll be fine. There's a lock on the door. If you want privacy." Lydia's hands stilled in the wash water. She understood what he was trying to say, and something in her chest loosened slightly. "Thank you." He nodded, set down the dish towel. "I'll be up at dawn. Ranch doesn't run itself." "What would you like me to do?" He looked at her, genuinely surprised. "What?" "I'm here, Mr. Hale. I might as well be useful. What needs doing?" "You're a school teacher." "I'm also a woman with 2 functioning hands and a brain. Surely there's something I can contribute beyond cooking meals and staying out of your way." Ethan studied her for a long moment, and she met his gaze steadily. Finally, he nodded. "Chickens need feeding in the morning. Eggs need collecting. Garden's overgrown. Hasn't been touched since Sarah." He stopped. "It could use work. Emma's supposed to keep up with her studies, but she's been slacking. Maybe you could—" "I'll handle it." "Just like that?" "I made a commitment when I signed those papers. I intend to honor it." Lydia dried her hands on a towel, her movements precise. 1 month, Mr. Hale. Let's make it productive." He almost smiled. Almost. "Fair enough." After he left, Lydia stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere, Emma was crying, soft, muffled sounds that carried through the thin walls. In the other room, she could hear Ethan moving around, the creak of floorboards, the clink of a bottle. This was her life now. These broken people in this broken house on this struggling ranch. 1 month to figure out if she could survive it. 1 month to prove she wasn't the problem everyone thought she was. 1 month to decide if survival was even worth the cost. She picked up the lamp and headed to her small room off the kitchen. It was exactly as he'd described: a bed, a dresser, a window that looked out toward the barn. Simple. Sparse. Hers. Lydia set down the lamp and unpacked her few belongings with methodical care. Books on the dresser, clothes in the drawers, the small wooden box that held her mother's hairpins tucked in the back where no one would find it. When she was done, the room looked lived in but not settled, like she was ready to leave at a moment's notice, which she supposed she was. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window in its frame. In the distance, cattle lowed. The sounds of a ranch at night, unfamiliar and strange. Lydia changed into her nightgown, braided her hair, and climbed into bed. The mattress was lumpy, the blankets thin. She'd slept in worse. But as she lay there in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home, she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in the church, or on the wagon ride, or during that awful dinner. Fear. Not of Ethan. He'd made it clear he had no interest in her beyond what the contract required. Not of Emma. The girl's anger was understandable, even justified. But fear of this whole situation, this gamble she'd taken because she'd been backed into a corner with no other options. She'd escaped worse. She'd survived worse. But surviving wasn't the same as living, and she was so tired of just surviving. 1 month, she told herself. Just make it 1 month. Then she closed her eyes and waited for sleep that took a long time coming. Bam. The first week was a study in careful avoidance. Ethan left before dawn and came back after dusk, spending every hour of daylight working himself to exhaustion on a ranch that seemed determined to fall apart. Lydia kept to her assigned tasks, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, attempting to resurrect the ghost of a vegetable garden that had once been someone else's pride. Emma pretended she didn't exist. It was fine. Lydia told herself it was fine. On the 8th day, she found the books. She'd been cleaning, another thing no one had asked her to do but needed doing anyway, when she'd moved a stack of papers on the side table and found them underneath. Primer books, arithmetic texts, readers for children, Emma's schoolwork, abandoned sometime in the last few months. Lydia picked up the arithmetic book, flipped through it. The last completed page was dated February. It was now April. That night at dinner, still silent, still tense, Lydia spoke. Emma needs to continue her studies. The girl's head snapped up. Ethan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. I'm handling it, Ethan said. When? Between mending fences and checking cattle and doing the work of 3 men by yourself? Lydia kept her voice level. She's fallen behind. 2 months at least, maybe more. That's not your concern. Actually, it is. I'm a teacher. It's literally my profession to be concerned. Emma slammed her fork down. I don't need you teaching me anything. That's unfortunate, because you need someone teaching you something. You're 11, not a child anymore. You should be studying history, literature, advanced mathematics. I know how to read. Reading and comprehension are different skills, as is critical thinking, proper grammar, composition. I said, I don't need you. What you need and what you want are also different things. Lydia met the girl's furious gaze without flinching. Your mother would want you educated. It was the wrong thing to say. She knew it the second the words left her mouth. Emma's face went white, then red. How dare you? How dare you talk about my mother like you knew her, like you have any right, Emma? Ethan's voice was quiet but sharp. That's enough. She started it. I said enough. He turned to Lydia and his expression was cold. Don't bring up my wife. Ever. I was simply stating, I know what you were stating. Don't do it again. He pushed back from the table. Emma, your room. Now. But now. The girl fled and Lydia was left alone with Ethan's anger. He stood there, hands braced on the table, breathing hard. I apologize, Lydia said carefully. That was inappropriate. Yeah, it was. He looked at her, really looked at her, and his eyes were hard. You want to make yourself useful? Fine. But my daughter and my wife are off limits. You don't get to use them to score points or win arguments. Understood? Understood. Good. He headed for the door, then stopped. She does need to keep up with her schoolwork, but you'll ask me first before you push her on anything. She's been through enough. Of course. After he left, Lydia sat alone at the table, staring at the cold remains of dinner. She'd miscalculated, pushed too hard, too fast. The memory of Sarah Hale was a raw wound in this house, and she'd just poked it with a stick. Stupid. Careless. She cleared the table mechanically, washed the dishes, banked the fire. Then she retreated to her small room and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of her mistakes. This was why she'd learned to keep her mouth shut. Why she'd learned to be invisible. Every time she spoke up, every time she tried to help, she just made things worse. Tomorrow, she'd do better. She'd be quieter, more careful. She'd stay in her lane and do her assigned tasks and not presume to have opinions about things that weren't her business. Tomorrow, she'd remember her place. But tonight, alone in the darkness, She let herself feel the anger and frustration of being constantly wrong in a house where she'd never be right. 2 weeks in, and something had to give. It was Ethan who broke first. He came in from the north pasture with blood on his shirt and fury in his eyes. Lydia, who'd been hanging laundry, saw him storm into the barn and followed at a careful distance. He was in there, throwing things. Tools, buckets, anything he could get his hands on. The rage was controlled, directed, but it was rage all the same. "Mr. Hale, don't!" He didn't turn around. "Just don't. You're bleeding." "I'm aware. Let me. I said don't!" He whirled on her, and she saw it then. Not just anger, but desperation. The look of a man hanging on by his fingernails. "I don't need you fussing over me like I'm one of your goddamn students. I don't need you hovering. I don't need—" He stopped, breathing hard. "I just need you to leave me alone." Lydia stood her ground. "What happened?" "Boss." "Fence broke. North section. Lost 12 head of cattle through it before I could get it fixed. 12 head I can't afford to lose." He laughed, bitter. "You know what 12 head represents? At market price? More money than I'll see in 6 months. Gone. Because I can't keep up with the repairs, can't hire help, can't do a damn thing except watch this place fall apart piece by piece." "Then let me help." "You? What are you going to do, teach the cattle arithmetic?" The words stung, but she pushed past them. "I can mend fences. I can fix things. I grew up on—" She stopped. His eyes sharpened. "You grew up where?" "It doesn't matter." "The hell it doesn't. You've been here 2 weeks and I know exactly nothing about you except you can cook mediocre food and piss off my daughter. So yeah, it matters. Where did you grow up that taught you to mend fences?" Lydia met his gaze, weighing her options. Then, carefully, "My father worked on the railroad, Northern California. I grew up in work camps. We built things, we fixed things. I know how to use tools, Mr. Hale. I'm not useless." He stared at her. "Railroad camps." "Yes." "And you ended up a school teacher. People change professions." Her voice went flat. "Or they escape them. Depends on your perspective." Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, but recalibrating. "You know how to dig fence posts?" "Yes." "String wire without cutting yourself to ribbons?" "I've done it before." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Tomorrow, north pasture. Bring gloves if you have them." He started to walk past her, then stopped. "And Lydia?" It was the first time he'd used her first name. She felt something catch in her chest. "Thank you." After he left, Lydia stood in the barn, surrounded by the tools he'd thrown and the anger that still hung in the air. Her hands were shaking slightly. From adrenaline, probably, or from the shock of being seen, actually seen for the first time since she'd arrived. She picked up the scattered tools, put them back where they belonged, and went to find work gloves. Tomorrow, she'd prove she wasn't useless. Tomorrow, she'd show him what she could do. Tomorrow, maybe, they'd stop being quite such strangers. The north pasture was a disaster. Ethan hadn't exaggerated. The fence line ran for nearly half a mile, and at least a third of it was in terrible shape, posts rotted through, wire sagging or broken, gaps large enough for cattle to wander through at will. Lydia stood looking at it, calculating the work involved, and felt her back hurt in anticipation. "Still want to help?" She turned. Ethan had his tools, his work gloves, and an expression that said he expected her to back out any second. "Where do we start?" They started with the worst section, digging out rotted posts and sinking new ones. It was brutal work. The ground was hard, the sun was merciless, and Lydia's soft teacher's hands blistered within the first hour. She didn't complain, didn't stop. Ethan noticed. She saw him watching her out of the corner of his eye, saw the surprise when she kept pace with him, when she knew which tool to hand him without being asked, when she strung wire with quick, competent movements. "Your father," he said around noon, both of them taking a water break in the shade of a scraggly oak. "He teach you all this?" "Among other things." "He's still alive?" "No. Died when I was 16. "Mother?" "Dead before that." Lydia drank deeply, wiped her mouth. "It was just me and my father for a long time, then just me. Ethan was quiet, turning this information over. That why you became a teacher? Nowhere else to go? Something like that. She wasn't ready to tell him the whole truth. Might never be. What about you? This ranch been in your family long? Bought it 12 years ago. Worked my ass off to get the down payment. Worked harder to make the payments after. He stared out at the land and his voice went rough. Sarah loved it here. Said it was the first place that felt like home. Lydia didn't say anything. Couldn't, really. The grief in his voice was too raw. She died in that house, Ethan continued, like he couldn't stop now that he'd started. Pneumonia, winter 2 years ago. Doctor came too late, or maybe there was nothing he could have done anyway. She just slipped away. Emma was 9, didn't understand why her mother went to bed one day and never woke up. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. He stood abruptly, shook off the moment. Back to work. Got a lot of ground to cover. They worked until dark, and by the time they finished, they'd repaired maybe a quarter of what needed doing. Lydia's hands were raw, her shoulders screamed, and she was pretty sure she'd have bruises in places she didn't know could bruise. But they'd done good work, solid work, together. On the ride back to the house, Ethan spoke. You were right. About Emma's schooling. She needs to keep up. Lydia waited. But you have to understand she's angry at everyone and everything right now, including me. Especially me. Pushing her won't work. What will? I don't know. If I knew, I'd have done it already. He was quiet for a moment. But maybe if you ask instead of tell, if you make it her choice instead of an order, she might respond better. I can try. That's all I'm asking. When they got back, Emma was waiting on the porch. She took one look at them, dirt-streaked, exhausted, clearly having worked together all day, and her face went carefully blank. Dinner's cold, she said. That's all right, Ethan replied. We'll heat it up. Emma's eyes flicked to Lydia, then away. You look terrible. Thank you, Lydia said dryly. That's very observant. Was that a smile? Just the tiniest hint of one, quickly suppressed? Lydia couldn't tell. Inside, they reheated the stew Emma had apparently made. It was not good. Oversalted and undercooked, the vegetables still crunchy. This is awful, Emma said defensively, before either of them could comment. It's edible, Ethan said, echoing the words he'd once used for Lydia's cooking. Emma looked at him, then at Lydia, then back at her bowl. And then, miracle of miracles, she laughed. Just a small huff of air, but it was definitely a laugh. We're all terrible cooks. Speak for yourself, Lydia said. Mine was edible. This is survivable. There's a hierarchy. Emma's lips twitched. Yours was barely better. I'll take barely better over actively bad. At least I tried to add flavor. Salt isn't flavor, it's assault. Ethan watched them volley back and forth, his expression caught somewhere between bewildered and cautiously hopeful. When Emma met Lydia's eyes and didn't immediately look away, something in the room shifted. Not fixed, not healed, but different. After dinner, while Emma was in her room, Ethan caught Lydia's arm. That was good. What you did there. I just insulted her cooking. You engaged with her, made her laugh. That's more than I've managed in weeks. Lydia looked down at his hand on her arm and he dropped it quickly. She's a smart girl. She just needs someone to treat her like one instead of like broken glass. Maybe. He hesitated. The fence tomorrow. I'll be ready. This time, his smile was real. Small, but real. I believe you. That night, in her small room, Lydia tended to her blistered hands and aching muscles and thought about the day, about working alongside Ethan, about making Emma laugh, about feeling, for the first time, like maybe she could find a place here. It was a dangerous thought. She'd learned not to let herself hope for things like belonging. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't quite silence the small voice that whispered, "What if?" 3 weeks. They'd fallen into a routine, fragile and imperfect, but functional. Ethan worked the ranch. Lydia helped where she could. Fences, garden, chickens, the endless list of tasks that never seemed to shrink. Emma orbited them both, still wary but less hostile. Progress. Slow, painful progress. On the 21st day, Lydia made a mistake. She was in town, buying supplies. The general store was crowded, full of the usual Saturday morning shoppers, and she'd been doing her best to be invisible. Get in, get what they needed, get out. But Mrs. Henderson was there. The Reverend's wife, guardian of Silver Creek's moral standards, arbiter of who belonged and who didn't. "Well," Mrs. Henderson said, loud enough for half the store to hear, "if it isn't the new Mrs. Hale." Lydia kept her eyes on the flower she was measuring. "Mrs. Henderson, how's married life treating you? I imagine it's quite an adjustment living out there on that ranch." The words dripped with false sweetness. "And with poor little Emma, too. That child has been through so much." "She's resilient." "Resilient." Mrs. Henderson smiled, sharp as a blade. "Yes, I suppose she'd have to be. Losing her mother, then having you arrive so quickly. People do talk, you know." Lydia's hand stilled. "Do they?" "Oh, yes. They wonder about a lot of things, about why a respectable rancher would marry someone so—" She paused delicately. "Unsuitable. About what kind of arrangement you must have. About whether it's even a real marriage at all." The store had gone quiet. Everyone listening, everyone watching. Lydia turned slowly, met Mrs. Henderson's eyes with a gaze that had frozen better people. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Don't you? A marriage of convenience, some are saying. A business arrangement, not a proper Christian union at all." She leaned in conspiratorially. "And you, living in that house but not sharing his bed. Yes, dear, people notice these things. It does make one wonder what exactly—" "Careful." Lydia's voice was quiet, deadly. "You're about to say something you'll regret." Mrs. Henderson's eyes gleamed. "Am I? Or am I simply saying what everyone's thinking, that you trapped a grieving man with your— My what? Say it. Be brave enough to say what you mean instead of hiding behind your church lady respectability." The older woman's face flushed. "How dare you speak to me like—" "I dare because I'm tired of your whispers and your judgment and your petty small-town cruelty." Lydia's control was slipping, and she didn't care anymore. "You want to know about my marriage? It's none of your business. You want to judge me? Get in line. But don't you ever, ever use a child as ammunition for your gossip. Emma deserves better than that." "Well, I never—" "Yes, you have. Many times, to many people." Lydia picked up her basket. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have better things to do than listen to a bitter old woman try to feel important by tearing others down." She walked out of the store, spine straight, head high, knowing she'd just made everything worse. By the time she got back to the ranch, the damage was done. Ethan met her at the wagon, his face thunderous. "What the hell did you do?" Lydia climbed down, started unloading supplies. "I assume Mrs. Henderson paid you a visit?" She sent her husband. "Reverend Phillips just left. Said you caused a scene in the general store, said you were inappropriate and aggressive, said—" He grabbed her arm, forcing her to look at him. "What did you say to her?" "The truth. The truth." He laughed, sharp and angry. "You've been here 3 weeks, Lydia. 3 weeks, and you just made an enemy of the most influential woman in Silver Creek. Do you have any idea what that means? What that costs? She was using Emma. I don't care. You think I like those people? You think I don't hear their whispers?" His voice rose. "But I have to live here. Emma has to go to school here. We can't afford to burn bridges with everyone who says something we don't like." Lydia jerked her arm free. "Then what would you have me do? Smile and nod while she implies our marriage is a sham? While she suggests I'm some kind of scheming opportunist who trapped you? If that's what it takes to keep the peace, yes." The words hung between them like a slap. "I see." Lydia's voice went cold. "So I'm supposed to be quiet, grateful. Accept whatever abuse they throw because that's the price of being here. That's the price of survival in a place that already doesn't want you. And what about what I want? Or does that not matter?" "Honestly?" Ethan's eyes were hard. "No, it doesn't. Not compared to my daughter's well-being, not compared to keeping this ranch afloat. You want respect? Earn it by not making my life harder than it already is." Lydia felt something crack inside her, something she'd been holding together through sheer will and desperation. "Understood." She picked up the supplies, her movements mechanical. "I'll remember my place from now on." "Lydia, I said I understand, Mr. Hale. Was there anything else? He stared at her, something that might have been regret flickering across his face, but he didn't take it back, didn't apologize. No, nothing else. That night, Lydia lay in her small room and stared at the ceiling. 22 days. She'd lasted 22 days before the cracks in this arrangement became canyons. She'd been fooling herself, thinking she could make this work, thinking she could find a place here, thinking that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than the woman they'd been forced to marry for money. Tomorrow would be day 23. 1 week until their 1-month agreement ended, and Lydia was starting to think she wouldn't make it that long. The morning after the confrontation brought a silence so thick you could drown in it. Lydia was up before dawn, same as always, but this time she moved through the kitchen like a ghost. There, but trying not to disturb the air itself. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, started coffee, all without making a sound. Ethan came in from the barn, and they moved around each other like dancers who'd memorized a routine designed to prevent any accidental touching. He poured coffee. She sliced bread. Neither spoke. Neither looked at each other. Emma watched them from the doorway, her young face creased with confusion. "Did you have a fight?" "No," Ethan said. "We had a disagreement," Lydia said at the same time. Emma's eyes moved between them. "You're both liars." "Emma," Ethan started. "It's fine. I'm used to it." The girl grabbed a biscuit and disappeared back to her room, leaving them alone with the weight of their mutual stubbornness. Lydia finished her coffee standing at the counter, rinsed the cup, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Ethan's voice stopped her. "The garden needs weeding, then there's mending, then I thought I'd check the chicken coop for repairs." She didn't turn around. "Unless you'd prefer I do something else." "Lydia—" "Mr. Hale." She did turn then, and her face was perfectly composed. "You made your position clear yesterday. I'm here to make your life easier, not harder. So that's what I'll do. Is there anything else you need?" He opened his mouth, closed it. Whatever he saw in her expression made him change his mind about what he was going to say. "No, nothing else." She nodded and walked out, leaving him standing in the kitchen with cold coffee and the growing realization that he'd broken something he wasn't sure how to fix. The days that followed were a masterclass in polite hostility. They spoke only when necessary, and then only in clipped sentences that conveyed information without emotion. Lydia threw herself into work with an intensity that bordered on punishment, up before dawn, in bed long after dark, always moving, always busy. She fixed the chicken coop, replanted the entire garden, mended every piece of clothing in the house, and reorganized the entire kitchen with ruthless efficiency. Ethan watched her work herself to exhaustion and hated himself for letting it happen. But pride kept his mouth shut, kept the apology locked behind his teeth. She'd embarrassed him with the Henderson situation. She'd made things harder. She'd been defending Emma and herself. And he'd thrown that back in her face. On the 25th day, Marcus showed up unannounced. He found Ethan in his barn, shoeing a horse that didn't really need it, but gave him something to do with his hands. "You look like hell." "Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear today." Marcus leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. "Heard there was trouble in town." "Let me guess. Mrs. Henderson's been talking." "Mrs. Henderson's always talking, but this time she's got ammunition." Marcus paused. "Said your wife called her a bitter old woman in front of half the store." Despite everything, Ethan felt his mouth twitch. "Did she really?" "Apparently. Also said some things about church lady respectability and small-town cruelty that are being repeated with great enthusiasm by everyone under 30. Marcus's expression was carefully neutral. The woman might have made an enemy, but she made some friends too. Ethan set down the horse's hoof, straightened. "What do you mean?" "I mean the younger folks, the ones tired of being judged by the Henderson crowd, think it's about time someone stood up to that woman. They're calling your wife brave, refreshing." He paused. "Stupid too, but mostly brave." "She was defending Emma." "I know. I heard the whole story. Mrs. Henderson was using your daughter as gossip fuel, and Lydia shut it down." Marcus studied him. "So why do you look like you've been kicked by a mule?" Ethan turned back to the horse, hands busy with work that didn't need doing. "Because I told her she was wrong, that she should have kept quiet, kept the peace, that Emma's well-being and the ranch were more important than her pride." The silence that followed was damning. "Ethan, don't. I know what I did." Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you took a woman who was standing up for your child and told her to sit down and shut up for the sake of convenience. Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. That's not the man Sarah married. Sarah's dead. The words came out harsher than he meant them to. And I'm trying to survive here, Marcus. Trying to keep this ranch running, keep Emma safe, keep everything from falling apart. I can't afford to fight every battle that comes along. No. But you can afford to back up your wife when she fights them for you. Marcus pushed off the stall door. That woman's been here less than a month, and she's already working herself sick trying to prove she deserves to be here. Maybe instead of punishing her for having a backbone, you should ask yourself why you're really angry. After Marcus left, Ethan stood in the barn and forced himself to examine the question honestly. Why was he angry? Because she'd caused trouble with Mrs. Henderson? That woman had been a thorn in his side since Sarah died, always with her pointed comments about proper mourning and appropriate behavior. Because she'd made a scene? Hell, part of him wished he'd been there to see it. Or because she'd reminded him that he'd chosen survival over dignity so many times that he'd forgotten there was a difference? He found her in the garden, on her hands and knees in the dirt, pulling weeds with vicious efficiency. Her hands were dirty, her hair was escaping its bun, and there was a smudge of soil on her cheek. She looked furious and exhausted and somehow more real than she had since the wedding. "We got a problem," he said without preamble. She didn't look up. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves the bank and Garrett being a snake." He waited until she paused in her weeding. "He sent a letter, wants to see us. Both of us. Tomorrow." Now she did look up, and her eyes were sharp. "Why both of us?" "Letter doesn't say, just that we need to come to his office in Silver Creek at 2 o'clock tomorrow." Ethan pulled the letter from his pocket, held it out. "Could be routine, could be trouble." Lydia stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and took the letter. She read it quickly, her expression growing more closed with each line. "This isn't routine." "How do you know?" "Because routine doesn't require both spouses present. This is either a formality he's using to remind you he holds the power, or—" She stopped, read it again. "Or there's something in the loan contract that requires your wife's presence for certain transactions." "What kind of transactions?" "The kind that change terms, increase payments, add conditions." She handed the letter back. "We need to look at your contract, the original documents, everything you signed." "It's just a standard loan." "Mr. Hale, there's no such thing as a standard loan with a man like Garrett. He's a banker. Making money off other people's desperation is literally his job." She was already walking toward the house. "Where do you keep your papers?" He followed her, something shifting in his chest. This was the first time since their fight that she'd looked at him without that careful blankness. The first time she'd sounded engaged instead of just obedient. "Office, top drawer of the desk." She found the documents and spread them across the kitchen table with the same methodical care she applied to everything. Ethan watched her work, watched her eyes scan the dense legal language with a speed that suggested she understood what she was reading. "You've read loan contracts before." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "My father dealt with railroad companies, mining concerns, men who made their fortunes off immigrant labor and creative bookkeeping." Her finger traced a line of text. "I learned early that the most important words are usually in the smallest print." "What are you looking for?" "Clauses about modification, about conditions that trigger renegotiation, about—" She stopped, her finger pausing on a paragraph near the bottom of page 3. "There." Ethan leaned over her shoulder to read. The language was dense, deliberately obscure, but the meaning was clear enough once you untangled it. "Upon marriage of the debtor, all terms and conditions shall be subject to review and potential modification at the discretion of the creditor." That son of a bitch! Ethan felt heat rising in his face. He made marriage a condition to save the ranch, then buried a clause that lets him change the terms once I'm married? It's elegant, in a sociopathic kind of way. Lydia's voice was calm, analytical. He backed you into a corner where marriage was the only option, then gave himself the power to exploit that marriage however he sees fit. She looked up at him. The question is what he wants. More money, different terms, or something else entirely? Only one way to find out. "Tomorrow at 2. She started gathering the papers. "We should prepare. Go through every clause, understand every word. If he's planning to trap us, we need to see it coming." "Us." Ethan caught her wrist gently, stopping her movement. You said us. Lydia met his eyes, and for a moment the careful walls came down. You were right about one thing. Emma's well-being matters. This ranch matters. And if Garrett finds a way to take it, she loses her home. She pulled her hand back. So yes, us. At least for this. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. They spent the rest of the evening going through the contract line by line, Lydia explaining clauses and implications while Ethan grew increasingly angry at himself for not reading more carefully the first time. By the time they finished, it was past midnight and Emma had long since gone to bed. We're vulnerable, Lydia said finally, sitting back. These modification clauses give him enormous power. If he wants to increase your payments, foreclose early, add new conditions, legally, he can do all of it. So we're screwed. Not necessarily. She tapped the document. Legal doesn't mean unbeatable. It means we need to be smarter than him. And how do we do that? We listen tomorrow. We don't react, don't agree to anything on the spot. We take whatever he offers, bring it home, and find the holes. She looked at him steadily. He's used to people being intimidated. Poor folks who don't understand their rights, who sign whatever he puts in front of them. But he's not used to people who fight back. You sound like you've done this before. I've watched it be done. There's a difference. She stood, started gathering the papers. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Lydia. He stopped her with her name. About what I said. After the Henderson thing, don't. Her voice was quiet but firm. We have bigger problems right now. Whatever this is between us, she gestured vaguely. It can wait. She was right, of course. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a mistake he didn't know how to fix. She'd offered him an alliance, and he'd thrown it back in her face. Now she was offering it again, but this time it was purely practical. Strategic. He'd lost something in the last few days. He just wasn't sure what. The ride to Silver Creek the next day was tense. Lydia wore her best dress, still plain, still dark, but neat and pressed. She sat beside him on the wagon seat, back straight, hands folded, every inch the proper wife. If you didn't look closely at her eyes, you might think she was calm. Ethan looked closely. He'd learned to over the last month. He saw the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers pressed just slightly too hard against each other. She was preparing for battle. Whatever happens in there, he said as they approached town. We're a united front, husband and wife. He can't know there's any distance between us. Understood. She glanced at him. Can you manage that? Looking like you actually want me there? The question landed like a punch. I do want you there. Since when? Since I realized I'd be facing that snake alone if you weren't. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was close. Since I started thinking maybe Marcus was right about a lot of things. What did Marcus say? That I'm an idiot, in nicer words, but that was the gist. Lydia's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. He's perceptive. They left the wagon at the livery and walked to the bank, a squat brick building that sat on Silver Creek's main street like a toad on a lily pad. Garrett's office was on the second floor, accessed by a staircase that creaked ominously under their weight. The banker himself sat behind a massive desk that made him look small and mean, which, Ethan reflected, was accurate on both counts. Samuel Garrett was a thin man with thinning hair and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He stood when they entered, all false courtesy. Mr. Hale, and the new Mrs. Hale. How lovely to see you both. He gestured to two chairs positioned in front of his desk, like a child would position dolls for a tea party. Please sit. They sat. Lydia kept her hands folded, her expression pleasant and empty. Ethan had seen that look before, on her face in the church, on the wagon ride home. It was her armor. I trust marriage is treating you well. Garrett's smile widened. Such a practical arrangement. Was there a point to this meeting? Ethan's voice was flat. Your letter said 2 o'clock. It's 2 o'clock. What do you want? Direct. I appreciated that. Garrett pulled a folder from his desk. I wanted to discuss the terms of your loan in light of your recent change in marital status. The loan is current. Payments are on time. Oh, yes, very commendable. Garrett opened the folder, made a show of reviewing papers. However, as I'm sure you're aware, or perhaps Mrs. Hale made you aware, she seems quite thorough. The contract includes provisions for modification upon marriage. Lydia leaned forward slightly. What kind of modifications are you proposing, Mr. Garrett? The banker's eyes shifted to her, and something predatory flickered in them. Well, Mrs. Hale, given that your husband now has additional household expenses, another mouth to feed, as it were, I thought it prudent to adjust the payment schedule to reflect his increased financial burden. You want to raise the payments? Ethan felt his hands curl into fists. Not raise exactly. Restructure. Garrett pulled out another document, slid it across the desk. This new schedule would extend the loan period by 5 years, but with monthly payments increased by 30%. Ethan stared at the paper. That's not restructuring. That's highway robbery. That's the cost of marrying above your station, Mr. Hale. The false courtesy dropped from Garrett's voice. You wanted to keep your ranch. I made that possible. Now we're simply adjusting to new realities. The new reality being that you found another way to squeeze money out of him. Lydia's voice was cool, measured. She picked up the document, scanned it. These terms would make the loan nearly impossible to pay off. The increased payments combined with the extended period mean Mr. Hale would end up paying more than triple the original loan value. Garrett's smile turned sharp. I see your wife is educated. How charming. Yes, Mrs. Hale, that's exactly what it means. But surely you understand business. Risk must be compensated, and your husband is a risk. I'm current on every payment, Eon, Ethan started. For now, but cattle prices are unpredictable. Weather is unpredictable. And now you have a wife who, forgive me for being blunt, comes with no dowry, no connections, no value beyond what I assume are acceptable household skills. Garrett leaned back. From a business perspective, you've increased your overhead without increasing your assets. That's poor management. Ethan was half out of his chair when Lydia's hand landed on his arm. Not restraining, exactly, just present. A reminder. Mr. Garrett, she said, her voice still perfectly calm. I assume you're open to negotiation? Of course. I'm a reasonable man. Then I'd like to propose we take this document, review it thoroughly, and provide our response in writing within 7 days. Garrett's eyes narrowed. That's not how this works. You sign today, or the old terms remain in place, which, I should mention, includes a clause allowing me to call the loan due immediately if I deem the debtor's financial situation unstable. And you deem it unstable if we don't sign. Lydia's voice didn't change, but her eyes went hard. That's extortion, Mr. Garrett. Illegal in most territories. It's business, Mrs. Hale. And unless you're a lawyer, which I doubt, I suggest you leave the legal interpretations to those qualified. I'm not a lawyer, but I can read, and I've read the territorial statutes on banking practices and usury laws. She met his gaze without blinking. Would you like me to cite the specific statute that limits interest rate increases to 10% of the original rate unless the debtor is in default? Because I can. From memory, the silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Garrett's smile had frozen on his face, and Ethan looked at Lydia with something that might have been awe. That's an interesting interpretation, Garrett said finally. But I think I'll find that 30% exceeds 10% by a considerable margin. I'll also find that threatening to call a loan due as coercion to accept new terms is specifically prohibited under Section 3, Paragraph 2 of the Territorial Banking Code. Lydia leaned forward. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to take this document. We're going to review it with someone qualified, perhaps a real lawyer since you seem concerned about qualifications, and then we'll provide our response. In writing, within 7 days. And if I refuse? Then we'll file a complaint with the Territorial Banking Commission, along with a request for an audit of all your loan practices. Her smile was cold. I imagine that would be inconvenient for a man in your position. Ethan watched Garrett's face cycle through several shades of red before settling on a mottled purple. The banker's hands were shaking slightly as he pulled the document back. 7 days, he said, his voice tight. But know this, Mrs. Hale. You've made a powerful enemy today. I've made several in the last month. You'll have to get in line. Lydia stood, and Ethan followed. Good day, Mr. Garrett. They made it down the stairs, out of the bank, and halfway to the livery before Ethan grabbed her arm and pulled her into the alley between the general store and the feed shop. What the hell was that? That was me keeping us from signing away the ranch. Lydia pulled her arm free. You're welcome, by the way. You quoted territorial banking codes from memory. Yes. How? You're a school teacher. I'm a woman who's had to learn how to protect herself in a world designed to exploit people like me. Her eyes flashed. Did you think I became a teacher because I love children? I became a teacher because it was the only job that would let me stay educated, stay sharp, stay one step ahead of men like Garrett. Ethan stared at her, seeing her clearly for maybe the first time. Not the quiet schoolteacher, not the convenient wife, but the woman who'd survived on her wits and will alone. We're in trouble, aren't we? He said quietly. Yes. Garrett won't forget this. He'll find another way to come at us. She leaned against the alley wall, and for a moment she looked exhausted. But we bought time. 7 days to find a lawyer, examine the contract, look for weaknesses. Do you know a lawyer? No. Do you? There's one in Carson City, 3 days' ride. Then we have 4 days to decide if it's worth the trip. She pushed off the wall. Right now we need to get home. Emma's alone, and I don't like leaving her with all this hanging over us. They walked back to the livery in silence, but it was different than the silence of the last few days. This was the silence of two people thinking, planning, facing a threat together. On the ride home, as the sun started its descent and the shadows grew long, Ethan spoke. That thing you said, about learning to protect yourself, about the world being designed to exploit people like you. He kept his eyes on the road. What happened to you, Lydia? She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, my father died when I was 16. Railroad accident. Company said it was his fault, paid nothing. I was alone, no family, no money. The camp foreman offered me a solution. Her voice went flat. Become his companion, and he'd make sure I was taken care of. I was 16. I didn't understand what he meant until he spelled it out. Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. I ran. Took what little we had and just ran. Ended up in Sacramento, then San Francisco, working whatever jobs would hire a Chinese girl with no references. Laundries, mostly, some households. I taught myself to read better, to speak properly, to pass as educated. She stared at the horizon. When I was 20, I met a woman who ran a small school. She saw something in me, gave me a chance. I learned teaching, got certified, became respectable. And then you came to Silver Creek. I came to Silver Creek because the woman who gave me that chance died, left me the school. I ran it for 5 years before her nephew showed up with lawyers and papers that said it was his. I had no proof of her intent, no legal standing, so I lost it. Her laugh was bitter. I came here because it was far enough away that her nephew's reputation wouldn't follow, because I needed work and they needed a teacher, because I'd run out of other options. Why didn't you tell me this before? Would it have mattered? We were strangers getting married for convenience. My past wasn't relevant. It's relevant now. She looked at him then, really looked at him. Why? Because you just saved my ranch using skills you learned surviving men who tried to destroy you. Because you're sitting here telling me about the worst parts of your life without flinching. Because... He stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Because I was wrong about you. And I'm sorry. The words hung in the air between them. Lydia's expression shifted, something softening in her eyes. You were protecting your daughter. I understand that. I was being a coward. There's a difference. He met her gaze. You were right to stand up to Mrs. Henderson. I should have backed you up instead of tearing you down. Well, Lydia's voice was rough. That's unexpectedly honest. Marcus said I was an idiot. He was right. He's very perceptive, your brother-in-law. They rode in silence for another mile, but it was comfortable now, like something had shifted back into place. We need a plan, Ethan said finally. Garrett's not going to let this go. No, he's going to escalate. Lydia was quiet, thinking. The trip to Carson City. We should make it. Find a lawyer, get a professional opinion on the contract. See if there are legal options we haven't considered. That's 3 days there, 3 days back. At least a day in Carson City. A week then. Can the ranch survive you being gone that long? Ethan thought about it. The cattle were spread across the pastures. Most of the fences were repaired, and it was still early enough in the season that nothing critical needed doing. Marcus could check on things. Emma could stay with him, or she could come with us. Lydia said it carefully, watching his reaction. It might do her good. See a city, get away from Silver Creek for a while. And honestly, I don't like the idea of leaving her here if Garrett decides to make trouble. You think he'd go after Emma? I think desperate men do desperate things. Better safe. Ethan nodded slowly. The idea of bringing Emma made sense, even if it complicated things. And maybe, just maybe, time away from the ranch would give the three of them a chance to figure out how to actually be a family instead of three people sharing space. We'll leave day after tomorrow. That gives us time to prepare, arrange things with Marcus. He glanced at her. You really think we can beat Garrett? I think we can try. And sometimes trying is enough to make the other side blink. She smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her. Besides, I'm tired of letting men like him win. When they got home, Emma was waiting on the porch, her face anxious. What happened? What did he want? Trouble, Ethan said, climbing down from the wagon. But your stepmother scared him off. For now. Emma's eyes went to Lydia, something that might have been respect flickering across her face. How? I quoted banking codes at him until he turned purple. Lydia said it matter-of-factly, like it was nothing. It was quite satisfying. Emma's mouth twitched. I wish I could have seen that. Next time I'll bring you along. Lydia smiled at her. Someone should witness these things. That night, over dinner that Emma actually helped cook without complaint, they told her about the trip to Carson City. The girl's eyes went wide. Really? I can come? If you want to, Ethan said. It's a long trip. We'd be gone about a week. I want to. Emma looked between them, and her expression was more open than it had been in weeks. When do we leave? Day after tomorrow. Which means tomorrow we pack, prepare. Lydia met her eyes. And you'll need to keep up with your studies on the road. I'll bring your books. Instead of arguing, Emma nodded. Okay. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Ethan found Lydia in the kitchen, cleaning up. He picked up a dish towel without being asked and started drying. They worked in companionable silence for a while before he spoke. Thank you. For today. For all of it. We're not safe yet. I know, but you gave us a chance. That's more than we had this morning. Lydia handed him a plate, and their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. Ethan, she said his first name carefully, testing it. About the trip. We'll need to share rooms. Hotel space is expensive, and if we're trying to maintain the appearance of a real marriage, I'll take the floor. That's not, I'll take the floor, he repeated firmly. You've done enough. Let me do this. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. They finished the dishes, and before she could retreat to her small room, Ethan caught her hand. We're going to get through this, together. Lydia looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. I hope you're right. So do I. She squeezed his hand once, then let go and disappeared into her room. Ethan stood alone in the kitchen, feeling like something fundamental had changed. They weren't strangers anymore, weren't quite friends, but they were something. Partners, maybe. Allies facing a common enemy. It would have to be enough. They left for Carson City on a Thursday morning that dawned cold and gray, the kind of weather that promised rain but wouldn't commit to it. Emma sat between them on the wagon seat, clutching a small bag that held her books and the rag doll she thought she was too old for but still slept with every night. She was trying to look bored, but her eyes gave her away, bright with excitement despite her best efforts to hide it. How long until we get there? She asked, for the third time in an hour. Same as the last time you asked, Ethan said. 3 days. That's forever. Then you should have brought more books, Lydia said without looking up from the contract documents she was reviewing. She'd been studying them since they left, her eyes moving over the dense text with the same intensity she brought to everything. Emma craned her neck to see. What are you looking for? Weaknesses. Contradictions. Anything Garrett might have missed when he wrote this. Lydia pointed to a clause. See this? It says the loan can be modified at the creditor's discretion. But this section here says modifications must be mutually agreed upon. Those two statements contradict each other. So which one is right? That's what we're going to find out. Lydia folded the papers. A good lawyer should be able to tell us which clause takes precedence. If we're lucky, we can use the contradiction to invalidate the modification clause entirely. And if we're not lucky, then we find another way. She said it with such certainty that Ethan almost believed it. They stopped for the night at a way station about 30 miles out of Silver Creek, a ramshackle building that rented rooms to travelers and served food that was marginally better than eating raw flour. The proprietor, a leathery woman named Mrs. Yates, looked them over with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "One room or two?" "One," Ethan said, feeling Lydia stiffen beside him. "My wife and daughter." Mrs. Yates's eyebrows rose slightly at Lydia, but she didn't comment, just handed over a key and pointed to the stairs. "Supper's in an hour, extra if you want hot water for washing." The room was small, barely large enough for the single bed and a cot that had been added as an afterthought. Emma claimed the cot immediately, flopping onto it with the resilience of youth. Ethan looked at the bed, then at Lydia, then at the floor. "I'll take the bed," Lydia said. "You're driving tomorrow. You need the sleep." "I'm not letting you sleep on the floor." "Then we'll share the bed like adults and maintain appropriate boundaries." She said it matter-of-factly, but he saw the tension in her shoulders. "Unless that's a problem?" It should have been. A month ago, it would have been. But now, after everything, it just felt practical. "No problem." Emma watched them from her cot, her expression unreadable. "You two are weird." "We're practical," Lydia corrected. "That's what weird people call it." Despite everything, Ethan laughed. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just weren't paying attention." Emma rolled onto her side. "I'm hungry. When's supper?" Supper was beans and cornbread and coffee that could strip paint. They ate at a long table with 3 other travelers, 2 men who looked like prospectors, and a woman traveling alone who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Nobody talked much. That was fine with Ethan. But as they were finishing, one of the prospectors leaned forward, his eyes on Lydia. "You Chinese?" The question hung in the air like a threat. Lydia's expression didn't change. "Yes." "Huh. Don't see many of your kind out this way. Not anymore." He said it casual, but there was something underneath, something mean. "Thought most of you went back after the railroad was done." "Many did." Lydia's voice was perfectly controlled. "I stayed. Can see that." His eyes crawled over her in a way that made Ethan's hands curl into fists. "Must be lonely, being so far from your people." "She's with her people," Emma said suddenly, her voice sharp. "She's with us." The prospector's eyes shifted to the girl, and he smiled. "That right? And who might you be, little miss?" "I'm her daughter." Emma lifted her chin. "And you're being rude." "Emma," Lydia said quietly. "No, he is. Mama always said—" She stopped, her face going pale as she realized what she'd said. Then, quieter. "She always said people who ask nosy questions are just lonely and mean." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The prospector's face went red, and for a moment Ethan thought there might be trouble. But Mrs. Yates chose that moment to appear with a pot of coffee, her presence enough to shift the mood. "Anyone want more?" She looked at the prospector with eyes that said she'd heard everything. "Or are you boys heading up to bed?" They left. Ethan waited until they were gone before turning to Emma. "That was brave and stupid." "But mostly brave," Lydia added. Her voice was rough, and when Emma looked at her, there was something raw in her expression. "Thank you." "He was being a jerk." Emma pushed back from the table. "I'm tired. Can we go to the room now?" Later, after Emma had fallen asleep on her cot, Ethan and Lydia lay side by side in the narrow bed, both of them rigid as boards, trying not to touch. The room was dark except for the moonlight coming through the window, and outside they could hear the sounds of horses and the low murmur of voices. "She called you Mama," Ethan said quietly. "She didn't mean to. I know. But she did." He was quiet for a moment. Sarah would have done the same thing, defended someone being treated badly, consequences be damned. Lydia turned her head to look at him, their faces inches apart in the darkness. "Is that why you married her? Because she was brave?" "I married her because she made me laugh. Because she saw good in everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. Because she made the world feel less hard." His voice caught. "I married her because I loved her, and I thought we'd have forever." "I'm sorry you didn't." "Me too." He was quiet for a long moment. Why did Garrett really push you into this marriage? There had to be easier options for him. Lydia was silent long enough that he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I turned him down." Ethan went still. "What?" "3 months ago, he asked me to dinner. I said no. He asked again. I said no again. He started showing up at the school, making comments about how a woman alone wasn't safe, how I should reconsider. Her voice was flat, emotionless. When I made it clear I would never reconsider, he started looking for ways to force the issue. Your lone situation gave him the perfect opportunity. Get rid of me by marrying me off to someone desperate enough to take me. That son of a bitch. He's a snake. But he's a clever snake. He found a way to punish both of us at once. You for being poor, me for saying no. She turned onto her back, staring at the ceiling. Men like Garrett don't accept rejection. They just find more creative ways to win. Ethan felt fury building in his chest, hot and righteous. He's not going to win. I don't care what we have to do, what it costs. He's not going to win. That's a nice sentiment, but sentiment doesn't beat power. No, but intelligence does. Strategy does. He turned to face her. And you've got both. So we use them. We find his weakness, and we exploit it the same way he's been exploiting ours. In the darkness, he saw her smile. You're starting to sound like someone with a plan. I'm starting to sound like someone married to a woman who knows how to fight. He reached out, found her hand. We're going to beat him, Lydia, together. She squeezed his hand once, then let go. But when she spoke, her voice was stronger. Together. They reached Carson City late on the third day, both of them road-weary and covered in dust. The city was bigger than Silver Creek by a factor of 10, with actual paved streets and buildings that rose 3 stories high. Emma pressed her nose against the wagon side, trying to see everything at once. It's huge, she breathed. It's civilization, Lydia said, or close enough. They found a boarding house that would rent them a room. One room again, with Ethan taking the floor this time, despite Lydia's protests. Emma was asleep before her head hit the pillow, exhausted from the journey. In the morning, they found the lawyer. His name was Theodore Marsh, and his office was on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like pipe tobacco and old paper. He was younger than Ethan expected, maybe 40, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of sharp eyes that suggested he didn't miss much. Mr. and Mrs. Hale, he gestured to chairs. Your telegram was intriguing. A contract dispute with a territorial banker. More like extortion, Ethan said, handing over the documents. But we're hoping you can find a legal way to describe it. Marsh took the papers and started reading. His expression didn't change, but Ethan saw his eyebrows rise twice. When he finished, he set them down and looked at Lydia. You're the one who noticed the contradictory clauses. Yes. And you quoted territorial banking codes to Garrett, from memory. Yes. Where did you study law? I didn't. I studied survival. Lydia leaned forward. Can you help us or not? Marsh smiled, and it was genuine. Oh, I can help you. The question is whether you can afford me. How much? For a case like this? Against a man like Garrett? He named a figure that made Ethan's stomach drop, plus expenses if it goes to court. We don't have that kind of money. I assumed as much, which is why I'm going to make you an offer. Marsh leaned back. I take this case for a reduced fee, half what I quoted, plus a percentage of any damages we recover if we sue for fraudulent lending practices. Ethan blinked. Sue? Mr. Hale, this contract is a mess. Not just the contradictory clauses your wife found, but multiple violations of territorial lending statutes. Excessive interest, coercive modification clauses, failure to provide proper disclosures. Marsh tapped the papers. Garrett was banking on you being too poor or too ignorant to fight back. But if we bring this to the Territorial Commission, we can not only invalidate the modifications, we can potentially void the entire loan and sue for damages. How much in damages? Triple the amount of interest you've already paid, plus legal fees, plus penalties. Marsh's smile widened. If we win, Garrett doesn't just lose, he gets destroyed. And every other banker in the territory learns not to play these games. Lydia and Ethan looked at each other. In her eyes, he saw the same thought he was having. This was dangerous. This could backfire spectacularly, but it could also end Garrett permanently. What are the risks? Lydia asked. Garrett will fight dirty. He'll try to discredit you, destroy your reputation, maybe even come after your ranch directly while the case is pending. Marsh was brutally honest. And if we lose, you'll owe him everything plus my fees. You could lose the ranch anyway. And if we don't fight, then you're under his thumb forever. He'll keep squeezing until there's nothing left. Marsh looked between them. I've seen men like Garrett. They don't stop unless they're stopped. Your choice is whether to fight now while you have ammunition or wait until he's taken everything. Emma, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner with her books, spoke up. We should fight. They all turned to look at her. She set down her book, her young face set in hard lines. Mama would have fought. She never let anyone push her around. Emma looked at Lydia. And you stood up to him once already. We can't stop now. Out of the mouths of children, Ethan thought. He looked at Lydia, saw his own determination reflected in her eyes. We fight, he said. Then we have a case. Marsh pulled out fresh papers. I'll need you to sign some documents. Give me a full accounting of your payments and interactions with Garrett. This will take a few days. We can stay that long. Good. Because we need to build this carefully. Garrett's connected. He'll have friends in the commission. We need our case to be airtight. They spent the next 3 days in Carson City, going over every detail of Ethan's dealings with the bank. Marsh was thorough, asking questions that sometimes felt invasive but were necessary. Lydia sat through all of it, occasionally interjecting with observations or details Ethan had forgotten. On the fourth night, Marsh invited them to dinner at a restaurant that was fancier than anywhere Ethan had eaten in 5 years. The lawyer was in good spirits. I found 3 more violations, and I got a letter from a colleague who had a similar case against Garrett 2 years ago, settled out of court, which means Garrett has a pattern of this behavior. He raised his glass. We're going to win this. You sound confident, Lydia said. I am confident. Garrett's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. That's going to be his downfall. Ethan wanted to share that confidence, but something nagged at him, a feeling in his gut that said this was too easy. Men like Garrett didn't go down without a fight. He was right. They left Carson City on a Monday morning with Marsh's assurances and signed contracts tucked safely in Lydia's bag. The trip home was lighter somehow. Emma chattered about the city. Lydia seemed more relaxed, and Ethan let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. They were 2 days from Silver Creek when the riders appeared. 3 of them, coming fast from the south. Ethan saw them when they were still a mile out, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Something about the way they rode set his nerves on edge. Lydia, take the reins. What? Take them, now. He handed her the lines and reached under the seat for the rifle he kept there. It was old, probably hadn't been fired in 2 years, but it was loaded. Emma, get down on the floor of the wagon. Cover your head. Papa, do it. Emma scrambled down without another word. Lydia's hands were steady on the reins, but her face had gone pale. What do you see? Trouble. The riders closed the distance fast. When they were close enough to make out details, Ethan saw they were rough men, the kind you found in saloons and mining camps, men who hired out for things decent people wouldn't do. The one in front had a scar running from his eye to his jaw. They pulled up in a cloud of dust, blocking the road. The scarred one smiled, and it wasn't friendly. That's far enough, Hale. Ethan kept the rifle across his lap, not pointing it, but not hiding it either. I don't know you. Don't need to know us. We're just delivering a message. The man's eyes slid to Lydia, lingered. From a mutual friend. Says you've been making trouble in Carson City. Says maybe you should reconsider. Tell your mutual friend to go to hell. Now, that's not neighborly. The scarred man's horse shifted, moving closer. Maybe you didn't hear me right. This is a friendly warning. Drop the lawsuit. Forget about the commission. Sign the papers Garrett gave you and everyone walks away happy. And if we don't? Then accidents happen. Ranch fires, cattle disappearing. Maybe something happens to that pretty wife of yours. Or the little girl. He said it casual, like he was discussing the weather. Be a shame if anything happened to your family. Ethan felt ice in his veins. Beside him, Lydia had gone very still. In the wagon bed, Emma was silent, but he could feel her fear. You're threatening my family. I'm preventing future tragedy. There's a difference. The scarred man leaned forward. You got 2 days to make the smart choice. After that, we stopped being friendly. They rode off, leaving nothing but dust and the stink of horse sweat. Ethan waited until they were gone before letting out the breath he'd been holding. Are you all right? Lydia nodded, but her hands were shaking on the reins. Emma? I'm okay. Emma climbed back onto the seat, her face white but her voice steady. Who were they? Men Garrett hired to scare us. Ethan took back the reins, his mind racing. We need to get home. Fast. They pushed hard the rest of the day, not stopping until after dark. When they finally made camp, Emma fell asleep immediately, exhausted. Ethan and Lydia sat by the fire, both of them too wired to sleep. He's escalating, Lydia said quietly. Marsh said he would, but I didn't think it would be this fast, or this direct. Those men weren't bluffing. If we push forward with the lawsuit, they'll hurt us, maybe kill us. She stared into the fire. We could drop it, sign the papers, survive. Is that what you want? No. But I also don't want Emma hurt, or you. She looked at him. This isn't your fight, Ethan. It started because Garrett wanted to punish me. You could... Don't! He cut her off. Don't you dare suggest I throw you to the wolves to save myself. We're in this together. Remember? Together might get us killed. Then we die fighting instead of living on our knees. He saw her eyes widen. I mean it, Lydia. I'm done bowing to men like Garrett. Done letting them take what they want because I'm too scared or too poor to fight back. If he wants a war, we'll give him one. She stared at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. You mean that? Every word. Then we need a strategy. Garrett has money and hired guns. We have what? A lawsuit that'll take months and might get us killed before it's resolved? We have each other. We have Marsh, and we have the element of surprise. What element of surprise? Garrett thinks we're scared, thinks we'll fold at the first threat. Ethan leaned forward. What if we don't? What if we double down? File the complaint with the commission, go public with what he's doing. Make it so expensive for him to hurt us that he can't afford it. That's incredibly risky. So is doing nothing. He met her eyes. You were right about one thing. Men like Garrett don't stop unless they're stopped. And right now, the only people who can stop him are us. Lydia was quiet, thinking. Then she nodded. All right, but we do this smart. We get proof of the threats, witnesses, documentation, everything. We build a case not just for fraudulent lending, but for criminal intimidation, and we make sure Emma's safe before we make any moves. How do we do that? Marcus. We send her to stay with him until this is over. She'll fight us on it. Probably, but she'll be alive to fight. Lydia's voice was firm. I won't gamble with her life, Ethan. I can't. He understood. More than that, he agreed. Okay, we get home. We send Emma to Marcus. Then we go to war. They reached the ranch the next afternoon to find Marcus waiting on the porch, his face grim. Thank God. I was about to ride out looking for you. What happened? Ethan climbed down from the wagon, helping Emma after him. You had visitors. 3 men, rough types. Came looking for you 2 days ago. When I said you weren't here, they helped themselves to a look around. Didn't take anything, but they made it clear they could have. Marcus's jaw was tight. What's going on, Ethan? It's a long story. Ethan glanced at Emma. And one Emma doesn't need to hear all of right now. Sweetheart, why don't you go inside, get cleaned up? I want to know. Emma, Lydia's voice was gentle but firm. Please, we'll explain later. The girl looked between them, then stomped inside. Once she was gone, Ethan told Marcus everything, the contract, the trip to Carson City, the lawyer, the riders on the road. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, his face was pale. You're going up against Garrett with nothing but a lawsuit and a prayer? We're going up against him with the law and the truth. The law and the truth don't stop bullets, Ethan. You know that. Which is why we need your help. Ethan met his brother-in-law's eyes. Emma needs to stay with you until this is over. She can't be here if Garrett sends his men back. Marcus nodded immediately. Of course. But what about you two? You can't defend the ranch alone. We're not planning to defend it. We're planning to take the fight to Garrett. Lydia spoke for the first time since Marcus had started talking. But we need time, and we need Emma safe to do what needs doing. What needs doing is you both getting out of here, selling the ranch, taking Emma, and starting over somewhere Garrett can't reach you. That's running, Ethan said. That's surviving. No, that's letting him win. Ethan's voice was hard. I've run from enough things in my life, Marcus. I'm not running from this. Marcus looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. Sarah would have said the same thing. She never backed down from a fight either. His voice went rough. Fine. Emma stays with me. But you two better have a plan better than let's poke the angry bear and see what happens. We're working on it, Lydia said dryly. That night they told Emma. She fought it, just as predicted. I'm not leaving. This is my home. And it'll still be here when this is over, Ethan said. But right now, it's not safe. I don't care. I can help. You can help by staying alive and letting us focus on fighting instead of protecting you every second. Lydia's voice was firm. This isn't a discussion, Emma. It's what's happening. You can't make me. Yes, we can. You're 11. We're the adults. Sometimes that means making choices you don't like. Ethan pulled her into a hug despite her resistance. I know you're scared. I know you want to help. But the best thing you can do right now is go with Marcus and let me and Lydia handle this. Emma pulled away, tears streaming down her face. You're going to get hurt, both of you. Maybe. But we're going to try very hard not to. He wiped her tears with his thumb. Trust us, Emma. Please. She looked at him, then at Lydia, then back. Do you promise you'll be okay? I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure we all get through this. It wasn't quite what she'd asked, but it was the truth. Emma threw her arms around him, hugging him tight. Then, surprising everyone, she turned and hugged Lydia too. Don't let him do anything stupid. I'll try, Lydia said, her voice rough. Though he seems determined. That's because he's stubborn. Mama always said... Emma stopped, then continued quietly. She always said he was too stubborn to know when to quit. But that's also why she loved him. After Marcus left with Emma, the house felt too quiet. Ethan stood on the porch, watching them disappear into the distance, and felt the weight of what they were doing settle over him. Second thoughts? Lydia came to stand beside him. About 100. You? About 1,000. She was quiet for a moment. But I meant what I said. I'm not running anymore. Even if it gets you killed? Especially if it gets me killed. At least then I'll die standing up for something instead of running away from it. She looked at him. What about you? Still ready for war? Ready as I'll ever be. He turned to face her. So what's our next move? We document everything, every threat, every interaction. We get people in town to testify about Garrett's practices. We build a case so solid that even his friends on the commission can't ignore it. She paused. And then we make some noise. Let everyone know what he's been doing. Make it too public for him to bury. That'll make him come after us harder. I know, but it'll also make it harder for him to make us disappear quietly. The more people who know what's happening, the safer we are. It was a good strategy. Risky, but good. When do we start? Tomorrow. Tonight we rest. Because once this starts, it's not going to stop until one of us wins. They went inside, and for the first time since Emma had left, they were truly alone. No child is a buffer. No excuse to maintain distance. Lydia moved to her small room off the kitchen, then stopped. Ethan? Yeah? Whatever happens, she turned to face him. Thank you for not throwing me away when it would have been easier, for fighting with me instead of against me. You're my wife. That means something to me, even if it started as a contract. He met her eyes. We're going to win this, Lydia. And when we do, maybe we figure out what comes next. Together. She smiled, small but real. I'd like that. That night, Ethan lay in bed and thought about the war they were about to start. About Garrett's threats and hired guns. About the very real possibility that this could end badly. But he also thought about Lydia standing up to a banker twice her size. About Emma calling her mama without meaning to. About the way this forced marriage had somehow become the thing holding him together instead of breaking him apart. They were walking into fire, but at least they weren't walking alone. In the morning, they would start. They would fight. And whatever came, they would face it as what they'd somehow become despite everything. Partners, allies, family. Dawn came with the sound of breaking glass. Ethan was up and moving before his brain fully processed what he'd heard, grabbing the rifle from beside his bed and moving toward the sound. He found Lydia already in the main room, a lamp in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other, staring at the window where a rock the size of a man's fist lay among the shattered glass. They're getting bolder, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Ethan moved to the window, careful to stay out of sight. Outside, he could see nothing but darkness and the vague shapes of trees. If someone was out there, they were good at hiding. This is meant to scare us. It's working. Lydia set down the lamp, still clutching the knife. How long until they move from rocks to bullets? Not long. Ethan checked the rifle's load. We need to move faster, get the complaint filed, get people talking, make ourselves too visible to kill quietly. I'll write to Marsh today. Tell him what's happened. We need those documents filed with the commission by the end of the week. She moved to clean up the glass, but he stopped her. Leave it. We need evidence. Photograph if we can, or at least document everything. He looked at her. You should leave. Go stay with Marcus and Emma until this is over. No. Lydia, I said no. She met his eyes, and there was steel in her gaze. You don't get to protect me by pushing me away. We do this together, or not at all. They could kill you. They could kill you too, but I notice you're not running. She set down the knife. I've spent my whole life being protected or pushed aside or told to be quiet and grateful. I'm done with that. This is my fight as much as yours. He wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in a room and keep her safe whether she liked it or not. But he knew that look. The same stubborn determination he'd seen that when she stood up to Garrett, when she quoted banking codes, when she defended Emma in the general store. Fine, but we do this smart, no unnecessary risks. Agreed. She turned to survey the broken window. We'll need to board that up before it gets light, and then we're going to town. Town? Are you insane? Probably. But if we're making ourselves visible, we might as well start now. She was already moving, pulling on her boots. The more people who see us going about our business like nothing's wrong, the harder it'll be for Garrett to claim we're the problem. Besides, I need to talk to some of my former students' parents, get statements about his lending practices. Ethan stared at her. You're really not going to back down, are you? Not a chance. She smiled, sharp as broken glass. Now help me board up this window so we can go start a revolution. They rode into Silver Creek at mid-morning. The wagon loaded with eggs and vegetables Lydia had somehow found time to harvest. She'd insisted on it, maintaining normalcy, she called it, making it clear they weren't hiding or running. The town noticed immediately. Ethan saw heads turn, saw the whispers start. By the time they'd pulled up to the general store, a small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Henderson was among them, her face pinched with disapproval. Well, I'm surprised to see you both out and about, especially given the rumors. What rumors? Lydia's voice was pleasant, but Ethan heard the edge underneath. Oh, you know, about trouble at your ranch, about you making enemies in high places. The older woman's smile was cruel. People are saying you've been stirring up trouble with Mr. Garrett, making accusations you can't back up. Are they? Lydia climbed down from the wagon with deliberate care. How interesting. Because I heard that Mr. Garrett's been violating territorial lending statutes for years, and that he's hired men to threaten families who dare to challenge him. The crowd went quiet. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed. That's a serious allegation. It's the truth. We have documentation, witnesses, and as of today we have a formal complaint filed with the Territorial Banking Commission. Lydia said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Mr. Garrett has been running an illegal lending operation for years, targeting poor families, exploiting desperate people, and when someone finally stands up to him, he sends thugs to intimidate them. You have no proof. We have plenty of proof, signed contracts with illegal clauses, records of modified terms that violate usury laws, testimony from other families he's destroyed. Lydia's voice was calm, factual. And now we have evidence of criminal intimidation. Rocks through windows, threats against children, all because we dared to question his practices. Someone in the crowd spoke up, a younger man Ethan recognized as Tom Wheeler, who ran the feed store. Is that true? About the threats? Someone threw a rock through our window this morning. This is the third incident in a week. Ethan stepped forward. I've got a daughter staying with family because it's not safe for her at home. All because we hired a lawyer to look at a loan contract. More murmurs. The crowd was shifting, and Ethan could see the calculation on people's faces. Some were skeptical, sure, but others, the ones who'd dealt with Garrett themselves, who'd felt his squeeze, they were listening. This is absurd, Mrs. Henderson sputtered. Mr. Garrett is a respected businessman. Mr. Garrett is a criminal. Lydia cut her off. And if any of you have dealt with him, if he's given you loans with terms that seemed wrong, if he's threatened you or your families, we want to hear from you because this ends now. She pulled papers from her bag, held them up. This is a formal complaint being submitted to the Territorial Commission. It details every violation, every illegal practice, and it includes space for others to add their testimony. She set the papers on the wagon. Anyone who wants to read it, you're welcome to. Anyone who wants to add their name, we'll make sure it gets to the right people. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Tom Wheeler stepped forward. I'll read it. Garrett tried to foreclose on my store last year, said I was in default when I know damn well I wasn't. Another voice spoke up. Annie Chen, no relation to Lydia, but one of the few other Chinese families in town. He wouldn't give us a loan at all, said we weren't trustworthy, but he had no problem taking our money when we wanted to open accounts. More people stepped forward, their voices overlapping. Stories of excessive interest, of contracts changed without notice, of threats and intimidation. Not everyone. Mrs. Henderson and her circle stayed back, faces closed. But enough. More than enough. Lydia wrote down names, took notes, her face composed but her hands shaking slightly. Ethan stood beside her, watching the crowd, watching for trouble. It came in the form of Deputy Harris, pushing through the gathering with his hand on his gun. What's going on here? Mrs. Henderson sent word there was a disturbance. No disturbance, Deputy, Lydia said calmly. Just citizens discussing their legal rights. That's so. Harris looked at the crowd, at the papers, at Lydia. Heard you've been making some pretty serious accusations against Mr. Garrett. Not accusations. Documented facts. She held up the complaint. Which are being submitted to the proper authorities. Unless there's a law against that? Harris's jaw tightened. Mr. Garrett's an important man in this town. You go around slandering him, there'll be consequences. Then he can sue me for slander. I welcome it. Discovery would be fascinating. Lydia's smile was thin. But I suspect he won't, because everything I've said is true, and he knows it. The deputy looked like he wanted to arrest her just on principle, but the crowd was watching, and he was smart enough to know when he was outmatched. You're making trouble, Mrs. Hale. I'm seeking justice, Deputy Harris. If that troubles you, perhaps you should examine why. After Harris left, muttering threats that didn't quite rise to the level of actionable, the crowd began to disperse. But several people stayed behind, adding their names to the complaint, sharing their stories. By the time they were done, Lydia had 2 pages of additional testimony. That went better than expected, Ethan said as they loaded up the wagon. Don't celebrate yet. We just painted a target on our backs that's visible from space. Lydia tucked the papers away carefully. Garrett will hear about this within the hour, and he's not going to be happy. Let him be unhappy. We've got momentum now. They stopped at the telegraph office on the way out of town, sending a wire to Marsh with the new testimony. The operator, a thin young man named Billy, read the message and whistled low. You're really going after Garrett? We really are, Ethan said. Good. My dad had a loan with him. Killed himself when he couldn't make the payments. Billy's hands shook as he sent the telegram. Garrett told everyone it was my dad's fault, that he'd been irresponsible, but I saw the contract. I know what Garrett did. I'm sorry, Lydia said quietly. Don't be sorry. Win. Billy handed back the receipt. Make that bastard pay for what he's done. The ride home was tense, both of them watching the road for riders. But they made it back to the ranch without incident, and for a moment Ethan let himself believe they might actually pull this off. Then he saw the smoke. No. The word came out strangled. No, no, no. The barn was on fire, flames already reaching toward the sky. Ethan jumped from the wagon before it fully stopped, running toward the blaze. The heat hit him like a wall, driving him back. The cattle! Lydia was beside him, her face illuminated by the flames. Ethan, the cattle are in the north pasture. They're fine. The barn's empty except for tools and hay. He stared at the fire, fury and helplessness warring in his chest. But everything else, all the equipment, the winter feed, it's all in there. They couldn't save it. The fire was too big, too hot, too far gone. All they could do was stand there and watch months of work and years of supplies burn to ash. By the time the flames died down, it was near midnight. The barn was a smoking ruin, and Ethan felt like he'd been beaten with a hammer. Lydia sat on the porch steps, her face smudged with soot, staring at nothing. "This is my fault," she said finally. "I pushed too hard in town. Made Garrett look bad in front of everyone. This is him pushing back. This is him being a coward who burns buildings instead of facing people head on." Ethan sat beside her, exhausted beyond measure. "And it doesn't change anything. We're still filing the complaint, still going forward. We just lost a barn. Who knows what he'll burn next? The house? The pastures? Then we make sure he goes down before he gets the chance." Ethan took her hand, held it tight. "You were right earlier. We don't back down, we hit harder." She looked at him, and in the moonlight he saw tears on her face. "I'm scared." "Me too." He pulled her close, felt her shake against him. "But I'm more angry than scared, and I'm betting you are too." She laughed, watery but real. "I'm furious. I want to burn his bank to the ground. Legally, preferably. Legally." She pulled back, wiped her eyes. "Tomorrow, we document this. Photograph what's left. Add arson to the list of charges. And then we send everything to Marsh and to the commission, and we make sure every newspaper in the territory knows what Garrett's doing. That'll make him even more desperate. Good. Desperate men make mistakes." She stood, offering him her hand. "Come on, we need to sleep. Tomorrow we go to war for real." The next 3 days were a blur of activity. They photographed the barn ruins, documented everything, sent telegrams to newspapers, to the commission, to anyone who would listen. Marsh responded with fury and legal strategy, filing additional complaints for arson and criminal intimidation. And the territory responded. Newspapers picked up the story, rancher battles corrupt banker. And suddenly, they weren't alone anymore. Letters arrived, some supportive, some threatening, all proof that people were paying attention. On the 4th day, Marcus showed up with Emma in tow. "I can't keep her any longer. She threatened to walk home by herself." Emma threw herself at Ethan, then at Lydia. "I heard about the barn. Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" "We're fine," Lydia assured her, "but it's still not safe. I don't care. I'm not leaving again." Emma's face was set in stubborn lines that reminded Ethan painfully of Sarah. "This is my home. Our home. And I'm not going to hide while you two fight alone." Ethan looked at Marcus, who shrugged. "Tried telling her that. She's got her mother's stubbornness. And her father's stupidity," Emma added. "So I fit right in." Despite everything, Ethan laughed. "All right, you can stay. But you follow our rules, you stay close, and if we say run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." That night, the 3 of them sat at the dinner table like a family for the first time in weeks. Emma told them about staying with Marcus, about the letters she'd written to the territorial governor, about the petition she'd started at school. "You did what?" Ethan stared at her. "Started a petition. Got 43 signatures from families who've been hurt by Garrett, or know someone who has." Emma pulled a crumpled paper from her pocket. "Figured it couldn't hurt." Lydia took the paper, read through it, and her eyes went soft. "Emma, this is incredible. It's just names. It's proof that people are standing with us, that we're not alone in this." Lydia looked at Ethan. "We should send this to the commission too. Public support matters. Everything matters at this point." Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. They were tired, they were scared, but they were together. And somehow, that made all the difference. The knock came at dawn 2 days later. Ethan answered the door to find a man in a suit he didn't recognize, holding an official-looking envelope. "Ethan Hale? That's me." "You've been served." The man handed over the envelope and left before Ethan could respond. Inside was a lawsuit. Garrett was suing him for slander, defamation, and breach of contract. The damages requested were staggering, enough to take the ranch 3 times over. Lydia read over his shoulder, her breath catching. "He's trying to bury us in legal fees. Even if we win, the cost of fighting this." "Marsh," Ethan said. "We need to wire Marsh now." They rode to town, sent the telegram, and waited. Marsh's response came within hours. "Don't worry, expected this. Countersuing for malicious prosecution. This helps our case." "How does getting sued help our case?" Emma asked, reading over Lydia's shoulder. "Because it proves Garrett's trying to silence us through legal intimidation. It strengthens our complaint about his practices." Lydia folded the telegram. "He's playing checkers, we're playing chess." But that night, alone in their room, they'd stopped pretending to sleep separately after the barn fire. Too tired and too scared to maintain the fiction, Lydia's composure cracked. What if we lose? What if all this fighting just makes it worse and we end up with nothing? Then we'll have nothing together. Ethan pulled her close, felt her breath against his neck. But I don't think we're going to lose. Garrett's getting sloppy. The lawsuit, the fire, the threats. He's panicking, and panicked men make mistakes. I hope you're right. Me too. He was quiet for a moment. Lydia, when this is over, assuming we survive, what do you want? What do I want? She pulled back to look at him. I don't understand. This marriage started as a contract, a business arrangement, but it's become something else, something real. He touched her face. So I'm asking, when the dust settles and we're not fighting for our lives anymore, what do you want this to be? She stared at him, and he saw a dozen emotions cross her face: fear, hope, longing, doubt. I want it to be real. I want us to be a family. You, me, Emma. Not because of a contract or because Garrett forced us together, but because we chose it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I want to stay. If you'll have me. If I'll... Ethan laughed, pulled her close. I've been trying to figure out how to ask you the same thing. He kissed her then, properly, for the first time since their wedding day. And this time it meant something. This time it was a promise instead of a performance. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Lydia smiled. Well, that's settled then. Nothing's settled until we beat Garrett. Then I guess we'd better beat him. The summons from the Territorial Commission came a week later. A hearing had been scheduled for 3 weeks out in Carson City. Both parties were required to attend, along with any witnesses and evidence. Marsh arrived 2 days before they were scheduled to leave, his arms full of documents and his face alight with something that looked like joy. We've got him. The Commission's preliminary review found probable cause on all counts. They're talking about revoking his banking charter. Is that good? Emma asked. It's better than good. It means the Commission thinks we're right. It means Garrett's in serious trouble. Marsh spread papers across the table. But we can't get cocky. He'll fight this with everything he has. We need to be prepared for him to get desperate. How desperate became clear the next morning when Deputy Harris showed up with an arrest warrant for Lydia. You're arresting her for what? Ethan stepped between them, his hand moving toward the rifle by the door. Assault. Mr. Garrett claims she attacked him in his office during your meeting. Harris looked uncomfortable, but he held his ground. I got a warrant signed by Judge Morrison. I have to take her in. That's a lie, Lydia said calmly, even as her face went pale. I never touched him. Then you can explain that to the judge. Harris moved toward her. Ma'am, I need you to come with me. No. Ethan's voice was flat. This is harassment. Another attempt to intimidate us before the hearing. I'm just doing my job, Hale. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'll go. Lydia stepped forward, her chin lifted. But I want it on record that this is false arrest and malicious prosecution. Mr. Garrett is manufacturing charges to silence a witness in a banking commission investigation. You can say whatever you want to the judge. Harris pulled out handcuffs, and Ethan felt rage white-hot in his chest. Don't you dare put those on her. Ethan. Lydia's voice was steady. It's all right. This just makes him look worse. She turned to Harris. The handcuffs aren't necessary, Deputy. I'm not going to run. Harris hesitated, then nodded. All right, but you're coming now. Marsh stepped forward. I'm her attorney. I'll accompany her and arrange bail. They took her. Ethan watched them ride away, Lydia sitting straight in the saddle, refusing to show fear. Emma stood beside him, her hand gripping his. They can't do this, she said, her voice shaking. It's not fair. No, it's not. Ethan turned back to the house, his mind racing. But it's also a mistake. Garrett just arrested a woman on false charges right before a commission hearing about his illegal practices. Every newspaper in the territory is going to hear about this. He was right. By nightfall, telegrams were flying. By morning, 3 reporters had shown up at the ranch asking for comment. And when Judge Morrison held the bail hearing, the courtroom was packed. Lydia was released on bail within 2 hours. The assault charges looking increasingly ridiculous as Marsh systematically demolished Garrett's timeline and pointed out the convenient timing. But the damage was done. Lydia had spent a night in jail, fingerprinted and photographed like a common criminal. How are you? Ethan asked when she finally came home. Angry. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steel, and more determined than ever to destroy him. The hearing in Carson City was set for Monday. They left on Friday, giving themselves time to prepare. Marsh had arranged for witnesses: Tom Wheeler, Annie Chen, Billy from the telegraph office, and a dozen others who'd been brave enough to come forward. The night before the hearing, Ethan couldn't sleep. He found Lydia on the hotel balcony, staring at the city lights. "Tomorrow, everything changes," she said quietly. "Yeah." He moved to stand beside her. "You ready?" "No, but I'm going anyway." She leaned against him. "Thank you for fighting with me, for not giving up." "Thank you for showing me how to fight in the first place." He wrapped his arm around her. "We're going to win this." "How do you know?" "Because we're right, and because we have something Garrett doesn't." "What's that?" "Each other. People who believe in us. The truth." He turned her to face him. "And because I'm not going to let that bastard take my family from me. Not the ranch, not you, not Emma. None of it." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you, Ethan Hale." "I love you too." The words felt right, felt true. "Now let's go get some sleep. Tomorrow we end this." The hearing room was packed. Garrett sat with his lawyers, looking smug and confident, but Ethan noticed the sweat on his forehead, the tightness around his eyes. The man was scared. Good. The commission head, a stern woman named Commissioner Hartwell, called the room to order. "We're here to review complaints filed against Samuel Garrett and Silver Creek Banking regarding alleged violations of territorial lending statutes. Mr. Marsh, you may present your case." What followed was 3 hours of meticulous testimony. Marsh walked through every violation, every illegal clause, every piece of evidence. Witnesses told their stories: families destroyed, businesses ruined, lives shattered by Garrett's greed. When Lydia took the stand, she was magnificent. She recited banking codes from memory, explained the contradictions in the contracts, detailed the threats and intimidation. And when Garrett's lawyer tried to rattle her with questions about the assault charges, she faced him down without flinching. "Mr. Garrett filed false charges against me to intimidate me before this hearing. That should tell you everything you need to know about his character and his guilt." The room erupted. Commissioner Hartwell banged her gavel, but even she looked impressed. By the time Marsh finished, Garrett's lawyer looked like he'd been run over by a wagon. The banker himself had gone from smug to pale to almost green. "The commission will take this matter under advisement," Hartwell said. "However, given the severity of the evidence presented, I'm issuing an immediate temporary suspension of Silver Creek Banking's charter pending final review. Furthermore, I'm referring the criminal matters, arson, intimidation, false arrest, to the territorial prosecutor." She looked directly at Garrett. "Mr. Garrett, you're advised not to leave the territory." The room exploded into chaos. Reporters rushed forward, people shouted questions, and Garrett sat frozen, his empire crumbling around him. Ethan found Lydia in the crowd, pulled her close. "We did it. We did it," she echoed, and then she was laughing and crying at the same time. "We actually did it." Emma pushed through to them, throwing her arms around both. "Does this mean we won? Is the ranch safe?" "We won," Ethan confirmed. "The ranch is safe. We're all safe." Marcus appeared, grinning wider than Ethan had seen since Sarah died. "I can't believe you actually pulled it off." "Neither can I," Lydia admitted, "but we did." They stayed in Carson City long enough to sign the final paperwork, to give statements to the prosecutor, to watch as the territorial marshal arrested Garrett on charges of criminal intimidation and false arrest. The banker was led away in handcuffs, and Ethan felt nothing but grim satisfaction. Justice. Finally, the ride home felt different, lighter. Emma chattered about everything and nothing, excited to get back to school and tell everyone what happened. Marcus rode alongside them, already making plans to help rebuild the barn, and Lydia sat beside Ethan, her hand in his, watching the familiar landscape roll past. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we rebuild. The barn, the ranch, our lives." He squeezed her hand. "Now we get to figure out what normal looks like. I'm not sure I know what normal is. Then we'll figure it out together." He smiled at her. "We're good at that." When the ranch appeared on the horizon, Emma let out a whoop. Home! We're home! And for the first time since this whole thing started, the word felt true. Not just a building or a piece of land, but something bigger, something worth fighting for. They'd walked through fire. They'd faced down power and corruption and came out the other side still standing, still together. And now finally, they got to see what came next. The first week back felt like waking up from a nightmare, only to find the world hadn't changed as much as you'd hoped. The ranch was still there, scarred, but standing. The burned barn was a black skeleton against the sky, a reminder of what they'd survived. And Silver Creek was still Silver Creek, small, judgmental, and slow to forget. But something fundamental had shifted. People nodded at them in town now, instead of whispering. Tom Wheeler gave them credit at the feed store without asking for payment up front. And when Lydia walked into the general store, the room didn't go quiet anymore. Mrs. Henderson still glared, of course. Some things never changed. We should rebuild the barn, Ethan said one morning, standing in the ruins with Marcus. Can't run a ranch without one. You got the money for that? Marcus kicked at a charred beam. Last I checked, winning a lawsuit doesn't make you rich. No, but the commission settlement does. Ethan pulled out the letter that had arrived yesterday. Garrett's assets are being liquidated to pay damages to everyone he defrauded. Our share, plus the triple damages for the illegal interest we paid. It's enough to rebuild. And then some. Marcus whistled low. How much is and then some? Enough to hire proper help for the first time in 2 years. Enough to expand the herd. Enough to... He stopped, looking toward the house where Lydia was working in the garden with Emma. Enough to stop living hand to mouth and actually build something. Sarah would be proud of you, Marcus said quietly. What you did. How you fought. Ethan felt the familiar ache at his wife's name, but it was different now, softer. She'd be proud of Lydia. I was just along for the ride. That's not true, and you know it. Marcus clasped his shoulder. You could have thrown her away when things got hard. Could have blamed her for all of it. Instead, you stood beside her. That takes guts. Or stupidity. With you, it's usually both. Marcus grinned. So when's the real wedding? What? Come on. You two are actually in love now. Emma calls her mama without flinching. You're building a life together, not just surviving one. He raised an eyebrow. Seems like you should make it official. Do it right this time. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Marcus was right. What they had now bore no resemblance to the desperate arrangement they'd started with. I don't know if she'd want that. The first wedding was bad enough. Only one way to find out. Ask her. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Ethan found Lydia on the porch. She'd taken to sitting out here in the evenings, watching the sun set over land that was finally, truly theirs. Can I join you? She smiled, patted the space beside her. It's your porch, too. He sat, and for a while they just existed together in comfortable silence. This was new, the ease of it, the lack of tension. They'd earned this peace through fire and fear, and it felt precious because of it. Marcus thinks we should have another wedding, he said, finally. Lydia turned to look at him. Another wedding? Why? Because the first one was a business transaction between strangers, and what we have now is... He searched for the words. Real. He thinks we should celebrate that. What do you think? I think I'd marry you again in a heartbeat, but I also think you might not want to stand in that church again, making promises while half the town judges you. Lydia was quiet for a long moment. Then, you're right. I don't want to stand in that church again. But not because of the town, because that wedding was about survival, and I don't want to remember it that way. She took his hand. If we do this again, I want it to be about us, about choice, about love. So that's a yes? That's a, let me think about what I actually want instead of what's expected. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Give me a few days? Take all the time you need. But 2 days later, Lydia came to him with an idea that was so perfectly her, he wondered why he'd expected anything conventional. I don't want a church wedding. I don't want half the town watching. I want something small, just us and the people who actually matter. Who did you have in mind? Emma, Marcus, Tom, and Annie, and the others who stood with us. Maybe Marsh if he can make the trip. She smiled. And I want it here, on the ranch, on the land we fought for. When? Soon, before winter comes, while we can still celebrate outside. Her eyes were bright. What do you think? I think it's perfect. He pulled her close. I think you're perfect. I'm really not. I'm stubborn and difficult, and I hold grudges like nobody's business. Yeah, perfect. They set the date for 6 weeks out, giving Marsh time to travel and them time to prepare. Emma threw herself into planning with the enthusiasm of a general preparing for war, making lists and sketching decorations and insisting that everything had to be beautiful but not fancy because Lydia hates fancy. How does she know I hate fancy? Lydia asked, bemused. Because you wore the same dress for 3 weeks straight when we first got here, Emma said matter-of-factly. And you only own like 4 dresses total. It's not hard to figure out. I own 6 dresses, thank you very much. My point stands. Emma went back to her list. We need flowers and food and something for you to wear that's not your regular teaching dress or the sad gray thing from the first wedding. The sad gray thing served its purpose. Its purpose was to make you look like you were attending a funeral, which I guess you kind of were, since you were marrying Papa when neither of you wanted to. Emma looked up. But this time you actually want to marry him, right? Yes, Lydia said softly. This time I very much want to marry him. Then you need a dress that doesn't look like depression fabric. Ethan, listening from the doorway, felt his heart squeeze. His daughter was planning his wedding with the woman who'd somehow become her mother, and both of them looked happy. Actually happy. When had that happened? Slowly, he realized. Over fence repairs and late-night conversations and shared fear and hard-won victories. Emma had stopped seeing Lydia as a replacement for Sarah and started seeing her as just Lydia, someone who belonged in their lives because she'd earned her place there. The weeks leading up to the ceremony were busy. They rebuilt the barn with help from Marcus and Tom Wheeler and a handful of others who showed up unasked with tools and willing hands. It went up faster than Ethan expected, sturdy and new, a symbol of what they'd survived. It's bigger than the old one, Marcus observed. We're planning for the future. Ethan hammered in another nail. Bigger herd, more storage, maybe even proper horse stalls instead of the lean-to we were using. Listen to you, planning for the future. A year ago, you were planning for next week. A year ago, I was drowning. Now I'm not. Ethan stepped back to survey their work. Feels good. Building instead of just holding on. News of Garrett's trial had filtered back to Silver Creek over the weeks. The banker had been convicted on multiple counts: fraud, intimidation, attempted arson. He'd been sentenced to 10 years in territorial prison, his assets seized to pay restitution. The bank building sat empty now, a monument to what happened when greed outpaced conscience. Some people in town mourned the loss. Mrs. Henderson and her circle talked about how the town needed a bank, how they'd been too hasty in condemning poor Mr. Garrett, but most people felt relief. Freedom, the weight of debt and fear lifting. Tom Wheeler started talking about forming a credit union, something owned by the community instead of one man. Annie Chen offered to keep the books, her experience running her family's store making her perfect for the job. Even Reverend Phillips, who'd been conspicuously silent during the trial, stood up in church and preached about justice and standing up for what's right. Little late for that, Lydia muttered when Emma reported this. Better late than never, Emma offered. I suppose. Lydia went back to the dress she was mending, not for the wedding, just regular work. She'd bought fabric for a new dress but hadn't started it yet, claiming she didn't have time. Ethan suspected she was nervous about the whole thing. He found her that evening in the garden, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. Want to talk about it? About what? Whatever's bothering you. You've been tense for days. Lydia sat back on her heels, wiped her forehead. What if this doesn't work? The wedding? Pretty sure we can manage a ceremony without... No, not the wedding. This. Us. She gestured between them. What if the only reason this works is because we were fighting something together? What if now that the fight's over, we realize we don't actually fit? Ethan sat down beside her in the dirt. Is that what you think? I don't know what I think. I've never had this before. A home, a family, someone who actually wants me around. I keep waiting for it to fall apart. Her voice cracked. I keep waiting for you to wake up and realize you made a mistake. Lydia, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. I spent 2 years in a fog after Sarah died, just existing, not living. You pulled me out of that. You, with your stubbornness and your intelligence and your refusal to back down from anything. He took her dirty hands in his. Yes, we started this because we had to, but I'm choosing to continue it because I want to, because I love you. Not because you're useful or because Emma needs a mother, but because you make my life better just by being in it. I'm difficult. So am I. I hold grudges. I've noticed. It's actually kind of impressive. I'm scared, she whispered. What if I'm not good at this? At being a wife, a mother? What if I mess it up? Then we'll mess it up together and figure it out as we go. He pulled her close. That's what families do. They mess up and try again and love each other through it. She clung to him and he felt her shake with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. I love you. I love Emma. I love this ranch and this life. And I'm so afraid of losing it. You're not going to lose it. We fought too hard to get here. He kissed her forehead. And for what it's worth, you're already a good mother. Emma adores you. You're already a good wife. And you're definitely good at being yourself, which is all I'm asking for. They sat in the garden until the sun set, talking through fears and hopes and dreams for the future. And when they finally went inside, Lydia seemed lighter, more settled. The dress appeared 3 days before the wedding. Emma presented it with pride, having worked with Annie Chen to make it in secret. It was blue, deep, rich blue like the sky just after sunset, simple in cut but beautiful in a way that made Lydia's breath catch. Emma, this is not sad gray funeral fabric? Emma grinned. Annie helped. She's really good at sewing. And Papa told me what your favorite color was, so my favorite color? Lydia looked at Ethan, who'd appeared in the doorway. He shrugged. You wear blue whenever you have the choice. The scarf you keep in your drawer, the ribbon you use for bookmarks. It's blue. Seemed like a safe bet. You notice that? I notice a lot of things about you. He smiled. Try it on. Emma's been dying to see if it fits. It fit perfectly. Lydia stared at herself in the mirror. Not the sad, desperate woman from the first wedding, but someone new. Someone who'd fought and won and earned the right to be happy. You look beautiful, Emma said softly. Mama would have thought so too. The words hung in the air. Emma had been careful to differentiate. Mama for Sarah, Lydia for Lydia. But now she'd crossed those streams, and Lydia saw the girl's face go uncertain. I didn't mean, I know you're not trying to replace her. I know, Lydia said gently. And thank you for including her, for letting me be part of your family without erasing her memory. Emma hugged her fiercely. You're both my mothers. Is that okay? Can I have two? Yes, sweetheart. You can have two. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, autumn settling over the land like a blessing. They'd set up in the rebuilt barn, decorating it with wildflowers Emma and Annie had gathered. The guests started arriving mid-morning. Marcus first, then Tom and his family, then Annie and her husband, then Marsh, who'd made the trip from Carson City specifically for this. Wouldn't miss it, he said, clasping Ethan's hand. Besides, I wanted to see how the story ended. It's not ending, Ethan corrected. It's just beginning. When the time came, there was no formal processional, no organ music, no crowd of judgment, just Reverend Phillips, who'd agreed to officiate, and a small circle of people who'd earned the right to be there. Lydia walked across the yard on her own, no one to give her away because she'd never belonged to anyone but herself. She wore the blue dress and a crown of wildflowers Emma had insisted on, and when she reached Ethan, her smile was bright enough to rival the sun. Ready? He asked. More than ready. Reverend Phillips cleared his throat. We're gathered here today to witness the union of Ethan and Lydia, who... He paused, looking between them. Actually, you know what? I'm going to skip the formal speech. You two have already been married 6 months. You've fought battles, survived threats, and rebuilt your lives together. I think we can dispense with the lecture about what marriage means. A ripple of laughter went through the small gathering. Philip smiled. Instead, I'm just going to ask, Ethan, do you take this woman to be your wife, your partner, your equal? To love her not because you have to, but because you choose to? I do. I absolutely do. And Lydia, do you take this man to be your husband, your partner, your equal? To love him not because circumstances forced you together, but because you want to be together? I do. Her voice was steady and sure. Then by the power vested in me and the territory of Nevada, I pronounce you husband and wife. Again. For real this time. Phillips grinned. You may kiss your bride. Ethan pulled Lydia close and kissed her while their friends cheered. It was nothing like the first wedding, that cold, desperate ceremony in an empty church. This was joy, choice, love. When they broke apart, Emma rushed forward to hug them both. Can I call you Mama now? Like, officially? Lydia laughed, tears streaming down her face. You can call me whatever you want, sweetheart. Mama it is. Emma squeezed tighter. We're a real family now. We were always a real family, Ethan said. This just makes it official. The celebration that followed was simple but perfect. Marcus had brought his fiddle and played while people danced in the barn. Annie and her husband provided food, real food, not the barely edible stuff they'd been living on. Tom gave a rambling toast about courage and community that made Lydia cry again. And Marsh, practical as always, pulled Ethan aside with an envelope. Final settlement from the commission, your share of Garrett's liquidated assets plus damages. It's more than we expected. Ethan looked at the figure and felt his knees go weak. This is enough to never worry about money again, if you're smart about it. Enough to expand your operation, hire help, send Emma to university someday. Marsh smiled. You earned it, every penny. We earned it, Ethan corrected, looking at Lydia who was dancing with Emma. I couldn't have done any of this without her. I know. That's why half of it is in her name, community property and all. Marsh clasped his shoulder. Be happy, Ethan. You deserve it. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Ethan found Lydia standing at the edge of the property, looking out over the land that had almost destroyed them and ultimately saved them. What are you thinking about? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. About how different everything looks now. 6 months ago, I stood in a church and married a stranger because I had no other choice. I thought my life was over. She leaned back against him. But it was just beginning. I just didn't know it yet. Any regrets? None. Well, maybe one. She turned to face him. I regret all the time we wasted being angry at each other. All the weeks we could have been building this instead of fighting it. We needed that time to figure out who we were separately before we could be something together. He kissed her. Besides, the fighting made the making up more interesting. She laughed. That's one way to look at it. They stood there as the stars came out, holding each other and watching their friends clean up, watching Emma run around with the other children who'd come, watching Marcus play one last song on his fiddle. This was home. Not the house, or the land, or the ranch, but the people. The family they'd built from nothing but necessity and stubborn refusal to give up. I have something to tell you, Lydia said suddenly. Ethan felt a flutter of concern. What is it? I'm pregnant. The world stopped. Ethan stared at her, his brain trying to process the words. You're, about 2 months. I wasn't sure until last week, and I didn't want to say anything until after the wedding. Didn't want to... She stopped as he grabbed her and spun her around, laughing. Ethan, put me down. We're having a baby. He set her down gently, his hands moving to her still flat stomach. We're actually having a baby. Yes. Is that... Are you happy? Happy? Lydia, He couldn't find words big enough. Yes. Yes, I'm happy. I'm terrified and excited and... He kissed her. We're going to need to add another room to the house. We're going to need a lot of things, but we'll figure it out. She smiled. We're good at that. They told Emma that night, after everyone had gone home and it was just the three of them sitting on the porch under the stars. The girl's reaction was everything Ethan had hoped for. Pure, uncomplicated joy. A baby? Really? I'm going to be a big sister? She bounced in her seat. When? Can I help? What are we going to name it? Slow down, Lydia laughed. It won't be here until spring, and yes, you can help. As for names, we have time to figure that out. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, can we give them a middle name for Mama? Ethan felt his throat close. Lydia reached across and took Emma's hand. I think that's a beautiful idea. Sarah for a girl, maybe? Or some version of it for a boy? Sarah for a girl, Emma said firmly. Mama would like that. A way to be part of the new baby, even though she's not here. Then that's what we'll do. Lydia's eyes were wet. Thank you for suggesting it. We're a family, Emma said simply. All of us. Even Mama, even though she's gone. And now we're getting bigger, she grinned. This is the best day ever. Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by November. But the new barn stood strong, the cattle were fed and healthy, and the house, expanded now with the addition of a nursery and a proper room for Emma, felt warm and lived in. Lydia's pregnancy progressed smoothly despite her constant worry that something would go wrong. Ethan learned to read her moods, to know when she needed space and when she needed reassurance. Emma appointed herself guardian of her future sibling, scolding Lydia whenever she tried to do too much work. "The baby needs you to rest," she'd say with all the authority of her 12 years. "The baby is the size of a bean. I think I can collect eggs without damaging it. Mama rested when she was pregnant with me. Your mother had a husband who insisted she put her feet up every 5 minutes. I have a ranch to run." "You have a husband now too," Ethan pointed out, taking the egg basket from her. "And I'm insisting you put your feet up. I'm going to go crazy if I spend 6 months sitting down." "Then sit down and teach Emma. She's been slacking on her studies again." It became their routine through the winter, Lydia teaching Emma advanced mathematics and literature, while Ethan and Marcus handled the ranch work. Letters arrived regularly from Marsh, updating them on the continued fallout from Garrett's conviction. 3 other bankers had been investigated and found guilty of similar practices. The territorial legislature was considering new banking regulations. "You started a revolution," Marsh wrote. "People are calling you the couple who took down corruption in Silver Creek. You're famous." "I don't want to be famous," Lydia said, reading the letter. "I just wanted to survive." "You did more than survive. You changed things." Ethan read over her shoulder. "People have rights now because you fought for them. We fought for them." "Semantics." He kissed her neck. "How are you feeling?" "Fat and tired and wonderful." She leaned back against him. "Is it strange that I'm happy? After everything?" "Not strange. Earned." He rested his hand on her growing belly. "We earned this happiness. Every bit of it." Spring arrived with rain and new grass and the sound of cattle giving birth in the pastures. Lydia's time came on a morning in late April, the sky breaking open with storms that rattled the windows and made Emma nervous. "Is she going to be okay?" the girl asked, pacing in the kitchen while the midwife worked upstairs. "She's going to be fine," Ethan said with more confidence than he felt. "Lydia's strong. She'll get through this." "Mama was strong too, and she—" Emma's voice broke. Ethan pulled her close. "I know, but this is different. The midwife's here early, Lydia's healthy, and—" He stopped as a cry rang out from upstairs. Not Lydia's cry, a baby's. They rushed up to find Lydia propped up in bed, exhausted and sweating and holding a tiny red-faced infant. The midwife was cleaning up, smiling. "A girl, healthy lungs, healthy everything. Congratulations." Emma moved to the bedside, eyes wide. "She's so small. She'll get bigger." Lydia's voice was rough but happy. "Want to hold your sister?" They named her Sarah Rose Hale. Sarah for the woman who'd come before, Rose for the thorns and beauty of the life they'd built. She had Ethan's dark hair and Lydia's eyes, and when she cried, the house felt more alive than it had in years. Emma took to big sister duties with fierce dedication, helping with feedings and changings and rocking the baby to sleep. Lydia watched her with something like awe, this girl who'd started out hating her and ended up being one of her greatest allies. "Thank you," she said one night, as Emma carefully laid the sleeping baby in her cradle. "For what?" "For giving me a chance, for letting me be part of your family." Emma looked at her seriously. "You didn't let me do anything. You earned it. You fought for us, for Papa, for the ranch. You stood up when it was scary, and you didn't run away." She smiled. "That's what mothers do. So thank you for being mine." Summer settled over the ranch like a warm blanket. The herd had grown, new calves frolicking in the pastures. The garden was flourishing under Lydia's careful management, and the house was full of noise, baby cries, and Emma's laughter, and the sounds of a family actually living instead of just surviving. Marcus visited often, bringing news from town. The credit union was thriving. Mrs. Henderson had finally stopped making pointed comments, possibly because her own son had praised Lydia in the town meeting. And Silver Creek was changing, slowly becoming a place where people looked out for each other instead of tearing each other down. "You did that," Marcus said, bouncing baby Sarah on his knee. "You two showed everyone that fighting back was possible, that standing up to power wasn't suicide." "We almost died," Lydia pointed out. "But you didn't. You won, and now everyone else knows they can win too." He handed the baby back. "That's worth something." It was worth everything, Ethan thought. Not just the victory or the money or the security, but the knowledge that they'd faced the worst and survived it together. That they'd taken a forced marriage and turned it into something real and powerful and good. On their 1-year anniversary, the real one, from the second wedding, Ethan took Lydia back to the spot where they'd said their vows. The barn was quiet now, the decorations long gone, but he could still feel the joy of that day. "Happy anniversary," he said, handing her a small box. Inside was a ring, nothing fancy, just a simple silver band with a small blue stone. "To replace the one I gave you at the first wedding. That one was obligation. This one is choice." Lydia slipped it on, tears streaming down her face. "It's perfect. You're perfect. This life is perfect." "Nothing about this life is perfect. We're still struggling with money sometimes. Emma's going through a phase where she hates everything. The baby never sleeps, and we still haven't finished fixing the fence in the south pasture." He pulled her close. "But it's ours. We built it together, and I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even the beginning, the forced marriage, the anger, all of it. Especially not the beginning, because it taught us to fight, to not give up on each other even when things were hard." He kissed her. "We didn't fall in love despite the hardship. We fell in love because of it, because we saw each other at our worst and decided we were worth fighting for anyway." They stood there in the barn that had witnessed their second beginning, holding each other and watching the sun set through the open doors. Outside, Emma was playing with baby Sarah in the grass, her laughter carrying on the wind. The ranch stretched out around them, alive and thriving. This was what they'd fought for. Not just the land or the money or the victory over Garrett, but this, the ordinary magic of a family that chose each other every single day. The messy, imperfect, beautiful reality of love that was earned instead of easy. They'd started as strangers bound by desperation. They'd become enemies under one roof. They'd fought a war against power and corruption and fear. And they'd emerged on the other side as something neither of them had expected to be. A family, a real one, built not on blood or obligation, but on choice and courage and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. In a land where survival was the only currency that mattered, they'd done more than survive. They'd learned to live, to love, to build something that would last beyond the hardship that created it. And as the sun set on their first year together, really together, honestly together, Ethan looked at his wife and daughter and new baby, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate kind that comes from having no other options, but the solid, grounded kind that comes from knowing you've already survived the worst and came out stronger for it. They would face more challenges. The ranch would have hard years. Emma would grow up and leave. Baby Sarah would bring her own storms. Life would continue to be difficult because that's what life was. But they would face it together, as partners, as a family, as people who'd learned the hard way that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. "What are you thinking about?" Lydia asked, leaning against him. "That I'm grateful. For all of it. Even the bad parts." He smiled. "Because they led me here, to you, to this." That's surprisingly sentimental for a man who once told me I was making his life harder. "You do make my life harder. You also make it worth living." He turned her to face him. "I love you, Lydia Hale. Not because I have to. Not because circumstances forced us together, but because you're the bravest, smartest, most stubborn person I've ever met, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." "I love you too," she whispered. "Even though you're occasionally an idiot, frequently an idiot." "I was being generous." She kissed him, soft and sweet. "Come on, let's go inside. Our family's waiting." They walked back to the house hand in hand toward the light and warmth and noise of the life they'd built. Behind them, the barn stood solid and new, a testament to what could be rebuilt after destruction. Around them, the ranch sprawled across the land they'd fought to keep, evidence that sometimes the hardest battles were the most worth fighting. And ahead of them, the future stretched out full of possibility, uncertain, challenging, but faced together. Always together. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not how they'd started, but what they'd become. Not the desperation that had brought them together, but the love they'd chosen to build in its place. They'd survived, they'd fought, they'd won. But more importantly, they'd learned that survival wasn't enough. That fighting wasn't the end goal. That winning meant nothing if you ended up alone. Real victory was this: a family gathered around a dinner table, laughing and arguing and being messy and human together. A baby sleeping in her cradle, safe and loved. A daughter who'd learned that love could expand to include new people without erasing the old ones. A ranch that was finally, truly home. They'd started this story as two broken people with no good options left. They ended it as a family who'd learned that sometimes the worst circumstances could lead to the best outcomes. That forced beginnings could become chosen futures. That love didn't have to be easy to be real. And as Ethan held open the door for his wife and watched her step into the warmth of their home, he thought about all the ways life could surprise you, all the ways hardship could forge strength instead of breaking it, all the ways two strangers could become partners, allies, and finally, impossibly, family. They'd traveled a hard road to get here, but they'd traveled it together, and that made all the difference.